And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. It's fantastic to be here for episode 49 of the X series. And it's a fantastic crowd already to be with you here Friday night. I'm joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
And Olivia has been really in there with the chat very early on. So that's a beautiful thing because she's been getting your questions early. And what I recommend actually is in the second part of the program, we're going to do questions. Just ask them all in caps and make them related to what we're going to talk about tonight, which is the UFO file. And we're going to go deep on the UFO file in a way that we've touched upon in other episodes. We've looked at the nitty gritty of X Protect, but we haven't really looked at the intelligentsia behind it to the degree that we're going to tonight anyway, and how it got set up. We've sort of looked at its shadowy aspects and how it moved through various government agencies, and also how it accomplished various things like creating groups like the Men in Black, and resorted to things like astral agencies to accomplish this kind of secrecy. Now, this episode dovetails between what we've done in relation to the hot zone on one side, which is this area which is off of Cuba and leans past Yucatan on one side and Miami, the coast of Florida, on the other. Now, this is going to be important to keep that in mind, even though we're talking about the UFO file tonight. I'm going to show how they're related, and this is really going to get us off in a totally different direction. Before we start, how are we doing out there, Olivia?
We're doing great. Everybody's in a good mood.
Yes.
Excellent vibe in the chat room, in the ideas room. Excuse me.
Now we're talking. I see Carly from Dimensions Beyond out there. Hello, Carly. And I saw Gigi Young a minute ago. Fantastic to have you out there. A programming note, which is tomorrow night we are coming on live at 6 p.m. for episode 50 of the X series. And you're going to want to join us for that. And for our European friends who toil so much into the night to stay with us, that'll be a little bit better time slot for everyone. There's a number of things that are going on in the world and in the alternative world that we could spend all night talking about, but we're going to dig into the episode, and maybe during the course of tonight and tomorrow night, we're going to be able to do that. Tomorrow night, Gigi Young will join us to go deep into Steiner's planetary seals and some major mysteries that we're going to unveil there. I can't wait for that. Tonight, we're going to go into someone who I think is perhaps the most significant figure inside of the X group that worked directly with the X technology. And really, what's nice about this is, in the real world, the world that we're accustomed to in traditional academia, this person's very celebrated, and they understand his immense contributions in mathematics and physics. But in that deep world, in the black world, in the black ops world, he also held a major position in that he controlled the UFO file. And we can take a lot of guesswork out of that in relation to this, because we had the top physicist in the country, Robert Sarbacher, confirm this on two different occasions. And so there's no question, it's not some MJ-12 document. It's not a rumor. It's not something said to a family member before they died. It's a documented event. John von Neumann is the person I'm talking about, and Robert Sarbacher identified him as directly taking over the UFO file after Compton was done with it, and Compton, of course, got it from Bush. Now, there's a little bit of confusion about Karl Compton and Arthur Compton, which I'm going to get into tonight. You have to understand the impact of the Comptons in relation to the UFO file and of the hot zone, and that's why tonight is going to be so much fun. Take both of our favorite subjects for the X series and blend them into this kind of amazing mix. The subtitle of this episode is The Men Who Control Apotheum. Apotheum is a term, A-P-O-T-H-E-U-M, that we use in this program quite a bit. And apotheum is something that relates to a certain type of physics or reality distortion field, which has global and possibly even universal implications. And it seems to reach even into spiritual implications as well, which is the unusual part. But for tonight, we'll talk about the apotheum aspect that relates to the physical dimensional world. Apotheum seems to be the name of the effect that happens when things like UFO sightings occur, for example. But it was also noted in ancient times in relation to a major disaster and a civilization that was lost in prehistory. This would be the disaster of Atlantis. And the mystery schools maintained this X-steganography through time, through the different monuments, through the different books, for the initiates who knew and understood how to utilize the X information. By the time we got to the 20th century, we found this very same process being used in government programs and relating to aerospace, which tells us a great deal about their knowledge of mystery schools and also their knowledge of secret groups. Now, certainly the person who controlled the UFO file and had a major role in selecting those who followed was Vannevar Bush. And Vannevar Bush was a grandmaster at the MIT Mason Lodge, in addition to being just one of the most impressive government scientists that we've ever had. He was right from around here, and his history is fascinating. We've covered him pretty extensively. What I would say is that there's a major key with Vannevar Bush in two different areas, which is that since he controlled something called the RAD Lab over here at MIT, which was fundamentally the network that was set up to develop and work with advanced technology during World War II, so that we could kind of hoist, advanced radar, hoist advanced weaponry on our enemies without them really knowing what was going on. And what happened is that Vannevar Bush employed for FDR, Truman, and Eisenhower the same secrecy rules that are involved with the deep, deep Masonic tradition. And that type of secrecy was unbeatable. But the secrecy also from mystery schools involved steganography. And steganography, of course, the X-steganography series is what we're doing here. All that steganography actually means, its original interpretation in the Greek, is a text within a text. So it's something that you're looking at and you can't see normally that there's anything unusual going on. But somebody who understands the setup, who understands the symbolism involved, can look at the same thing that you and I are looking at and get a whole totally different meaning out of it. Steganography was used in the Middle Ages. It was used to hide hermetic texts. It was used to hide different types of advanced teachings that would come out of monasteries. And it was also used extensively in the mystery schools to make sure that the adepts and the initiates in those schools were able to select those who would carry on their work, as opposed to just a kind of fly-by-night operation of people who wanted their secrets. The X-steganography was driven underground on a number of occasions. That's why it shows up in disparate places, but always with the initiates holding that information. Examples like the Book of the Dead. So it goes as far back as history goes. We are looking at its 20th century, 21st century use today, and that's important. As it starts to reemerge as something we can get our hands on in the 19th century, but by the 20th century, they're using it in relation to moving projects through different government agencies and maintaining the secrecy of the program and being able to communicate vastly with this network of X-steganography. Now, in these some 50 episodes that we've done, I think we've been able to outline that it is a dual kind of condition, the X-steganography. It's a dual process. On one hand, we have to look at modern technology, the most advanced technology, the hidden technology, the breakaway technology. And on the other hand, which is to X technology. And on the other hand, we have to look back into prehistory to see what were the secrets that they were keeping with the X-steganography. And if you go all the way back, you find on both sides this Apotheum effect, this reality distortion field seems to be the thing that they're protecting and using in secret. And it seems to have immense implications for humanity. So when we get at these questions, we're talking about people who were dealing literally with, even if we look tonight at John von Neumann, this is somebody who, was looking at a nuclear holocaust between the US and the Soviet Union. So these were people who dealt with kind of immense responsibility and immense implications from the work that they did. So sometimes their decisions might be easy for us to judge morally looking back at them, but we have to understand the kind of serious condition that they are in with these abilities that are necessary, but are also very, very dangerous for society. And I think if we take that point of view, it's going to be easier to separate out who is X-Protect and who is X-Share. Let's talk about these two for a second so we get some idea of what's going on, and then we'll dive into John von Neumann. I want to remind everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist program. It's fantastic to have everyone here. This is a great crowd, and I have to say I've been so impressed with the quality of questions that we've been getting and the quality of interaction that we've gotten over the course of almost a year now. Tomorrow marks a year of the X series with episode 50, and I do want to say here, it's really been remarkable having this kind of interaction. And in fact, some of those people who've come to me with their experience have been able to open up other areas of investigation, like the hot zone, for example. So we really appreciate it, and we're going to continue in that spirit here. So let's take a look at X-Protect versus X-Share. X-Protect is a group that looks at the X technology, say, especially since the 1940s. And a lot of that X technology resides in the UFO file. The UFO file is largely examined by groups like the FBI and tracked, and other groups like the CIA look at the other implications and try to do things like create counterintelligence stories to blow off the sightings. The UFO file, fundamentally, unidentified flying objects, unusual technology, exotic technologies. So not necessarily alien. However, when you get deep into it, you start to realize that they're working with an off-world formula. That is, they're looking at it from the point of view that they're interacting with something that's off-world. However, I want to point this out, that included with that, in the work of John Keeley and in the work of the Theosophical Society, Nikola Tesla, and others of this ilk, obviously the X technology has something beyond just being an alien, something that, hey, a flying saucer crashed and people, we were able to kind of go in there and redevelop the technology, and boom, we've got the UFO file. That's the technology. That's it. The X technology is actually much deeper, because the mystery schools held the X technology as well, if you go all the way back. And when we look at stories that come out of the mystery schools, like the Two-Eye Stone, like the work of Rudolf Steiner in anthroposophy, and the Edgar Cayce work, then we start to see that they had something of this nature all the way back then. So it's not all just one size fits all. Here's an alien box, we redeveloped it, and now everybody's after that. It goes deeper. However, I think the off-world implications and the off-world craft aspect is crucial. So I want to include both in this, but I have to say it gets into that balance situation where we're not just looking for alien tech. The X tech that Nikola Tesla took on, basically, there were aspects of it that became public and sort of caused huge hazards for groups like JP Morgan, because he talked about wireless energy the way that we're talking about Wi-Fi networks. So people would have that as energy. There'd be no reason for oil companies or gas or coal or any of that stuff that makes this small Davos elite crowd so wealthy. So we can see that they had a major problem. Whenever the X comes up to the surface, there are always these things to get rid of it. But by the time you get into the 40s and 50s, they're government-sanctioned efforts to get rid of it. And that goes to the idea of something called continuity of government. Now, in short, continuity of government is something we developed with the idea that at some point there could be a nuclear attack on the United States, and a secondary government would have to exist underground and call the shots. That's a fact of history. COG and COG planning is something that is a detailed fact of history. You can't get much information on it. As a matter of fact, in the Congress, you're not allowed to bring it up, as we've found out whenever it's been mentioned. But there are researchers like Professor Peter Dale Scott who've brought up continuity of government. I believe that the same group that operates the continuity of government program is what we would call X-Protect. And they are of the mindset that they keep technological advantages on one hand, and on the other hand, they also keep from society that ability for them to be on the public to be on the same level playing field with them. So their whole thing is secrecy. The wall of secrecy is their lifeblood. Without the wall of secrecy, their power goes, their life goes, they're dead. So whenever the wall of secrecy gets threatened, they respond like they're under attack and they get rid of the threat. And on our side, on the public side, we're just looking for information. We're just looking to scale the wall of secrecy. And, you've had people out there screaming for years about disclosure and things like that and never getting it, or getting really weird half-baked things like, and being happy that they have some rehashed version of Project Blue Book from 40 years ago. We can go a lot deeper than that. There's so much on the books now that if we use the X steganography, we can get an entirely different picture using the same set of details. What it is in relation to this is we have a whole new set of details. But in short, X Protect in the early UFO waves, you'd have a number of UFO researchers who turned up dead, quite literally, or disgraced, run out of town, and the witnesses threatened by Men in Black, for example. There were groups and people who investigated aspects of this, including Jim Garrison after the JFK assassination. And that's a different type of way that they dealt with somebody like that. They would destroy their reputations. They'd have the media go after them. And so we have something with X Protect, which is when people get in, they will utilize a series of tools. Now, with some people like the early UFO experts who were very intellectual, like Morris Jessup, they had to get rid of them, literally. So they created a suicide scenario. And you're going to see when we get into John von Neumann's life, they recreate this suicide scenario on a number of occasions. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Rock Reynolds wanted to ask, is X Protect Majestic 12 and or Vannevar Bush Research and Development Board?
You'll have members of X Protect inside of MJ12, but MJ12 was not X Protect. No, Vannevar Bush's method was the secrecy that he learned in his Masonic career. His using basically what are mystery school techniques to maintain that type of secrecy, which worked during World War II to the point where the Wall Street Journal is quoted in relation to Vannevar Bush as saying, look, this guy kept better secrets than military. So he was doing something that was working dramatically. So by the time they get in with the UFO file, which is the early 40s, not the late 40s, he's using those same methods and getting the same results. Yes.
Truth and Freedom says that on the Joe Rogan Alex Jones interview, Alex mentioned X Protect.
Oh, did he?
I guess so. We've got to find the clip.
Yeah. Well, I've gotten a lot of emails since that show saying that, God, Alex must be watching the show because he cited so many things. And in fact, he started talking about Werner von Braun just after we had done a show like the week before about it. So that's fine. It's interesting to me because I've always had the suspicion around Alex Jones and his work that he had encountered things relating to the secret space program and relating to NASA. And that, if you look back a decade ago, fundamentally, Alex Jones talked about three things: the Federal Reserve, the 9/11, and the Bilderberg Group. I mean, those were his go-to things, and they formed a kind of a triumvirate of factors that he could go back to over and over again. But as it turns out, the range, when you start to understand those circles, the idea that you wouldn't run into the UFO file when you're an Alex Jones doesn't make any sense. But a lot of his radio audience was residing in the Bible Belt, and it was not really something that they wanted to hear. Or there were people out there, guys like, say, Steve Quayle, for example, who regard anything that's alien as demonic. So it's very interesting when you look at that. But I would agree. I think it was a very unusual interview that Alex gave. And I do want to say this, regardless of how somebody would think of Alex Jones one way or another. The kind of deplatforming of Alex Jones and InfoWars, I mean, it shouldn't be something that happens in a free society. And it comes right down to the work that we're doing here, because if you can censor that, you can censor this. And trust me, they've lined these things up, as we've seen with the massive push against vaccine knowledge. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is standing out there and saying, hey, liberals, stand up for that. I can't believe you're going to allow this kind of censorship of material. So we have a very big issue there, and I think it's fundamental. But yes, that's a great question. Thanks for bringing that in. All right, so some snapshot of XProtect there. Fundamentally, they'll use agency resources to kind of discredit a figure who's working around their milieu, say in relation to the UFO file. And they'll discredit them if they get close to an aerospace secret or something about the X technology. That'd be the kind of their first method. The second method would be to take it down further, maybe to trump up some phony charge against them. I think it takes a lot for them to get to a lethal type of action. But they're certainly capable of it and have proved it over and over again. And they're a very, very unusual force, which are very, very hard to track because of the types of methods are so secret. And I've described them as an astral agency, and we've talked in detail about how this whole Men in Black phenomena that kind of got so much talk about this started is a direct correlation to XProtect. It's probably the easiest way to track them back. But they are very mysterious, and in that case, use almost metaphysical means to silence witnesses and things of that nature. So we're talking about something that's on a totally different level than just, guys showing up and threatening you. Now let's talk about X-Share, and then we're going to bring these around. Fundamentally, X-Share are people who have access to the same knowledge base. So they've worked on the same topics. They understand the off-world civilizations. They understand the X technology. They understand the implications of the Apotheum that reside inside of the UFO file. They understand what the cases mean, and they understand the implications for the world and for culture. And their idea, their fundamental premise, and you could say types like Oppenheimer would fall more into this category. JFK would fall into this category. Thomas Townsend Brown would fall into this category. And a series of others. Their idea is that they can take this information and share it with the public, and we can all come up with a wider explanation and a better culture as a result. So X-Share literally takes the kind of Winston Churchill tell the people approach and says, yes, we have these off-world civilizations here. This is what we've done to look at the problem. And fundamentally, we have access to this greater technology. We're working with it to improve society. They want to improve the culture using it. So there's a diametric opposition and literally an internecine war that takes place between those two forces. And at times, it's gotten so hardcore that in the case, if we go back some 50 years to the Kennedy assassination, that is a huge X-Protect, X-Share battle taking place through multiple levels of government, but ending with the top man, in this case, Kennedy. Now, two things that we've brought forward on this show in relation to that is, we've fundamentally brought forward public figures like Douglas Caddy, who have said that E. Howard Hunt has confessed to him, who was the top spy for the CIA, who is his very good friend. And he's given us this information that JFK was in fact assassinated over the UFO file. Absolutely makes sense. There's a great trove of evidence to support it. But I'm going to show you tonight how a series of time capsules also relate to this battle between X-Share on one side. Those are forces reside within the very same government and the very same societal structures, and X-Protect on the other, who just have a totally different, somewhat martial philosophy. Yes, Miss Livia.
Actually, I didn't have a question.
Yeah, what was that?
Would you like one?
you had something. Yeah, go for it.
Well, Kontiki Man wanted to know if you knew anything about the Battelle Memorial Institute, a $1 billion tax-exempt nonprofit trust involved in UFO intel and reverse engineering.
Yeah, that's very interesting stuff. And on a couple of occasions, people have sent me information related to it. I think it's worth following up on further, as a matter of fact. And I feel very much like, that there are groups like that. Permindex is another one that seems to be involved not only with assassinations, but aerospace. It's very, very unusual. So yes, that's a good one.
Mhm.
Let's take a look at John von Neumann and see if I can take this around to von Neumann's role working between X-Share and X-Protect and what happens to him and his family as a result. Very, very interesting stuff. It's great to have everyone out there. It's a huge crowd tonight. And like I said, tonight is episode 49. Tomorrow night, we're doing a special double episode here, back to back. And we'll be back tomorrow night at 6 after tonight. In the second half of today's program, we're going to be doing questions. So ask them all in caps and keep them on topic for Olivia to sort through. And we're going to do it that way. Let's take a quick look at something very unusual. You might remember an episode we did on Halloween where Gigi Young and I went through the Sar Tarot deck. And one thing that struck me very interesting is when I was going through and the role that they gave von Neumann in the deck, and this deck was very, very intricate. Whoever put it together, and we know who officially put it together, but the groups that put it together were so erudite in their information about the deep state that it's off the charts. But in any case, they put together this card of John von Neumann as death, which I think is quite significant. And how they list it are the Macy conferences, a core group member. Of course, the Macy conferences, the first cybernetics conferences, started in 1946. And John von Neumann really kicked off so much of that discussion. Von Neumann, of course, also was very much involved in the Manhattan Project, being one of the key men, along with Oppenheimer, who gave us the ability to develop the deliverable of the atomic bomb. He's well respected for having developed game theory, working with the United States Atomic Energy Commission. I mean, the accolades for von Neumann as a mathematician is when you go into math, he is singularly the leading figure in math in the 20th century. And so many of the things that he developed we're still riding off of. But what's not known about von Neumann is that he controlled the UFO file, and that's crucial. And I think it's important for us to understand the connection between those two. But of course, I'm going to prove that to you tonight as well. A couple of very interesting and unusual things that are kind of side projects for him. And by the way, quantum mechanics is something else that was also in his wheelhouse of talent. Now, here's something that's quite important, I would think. Yes.
I just wanted to throw in there, L. Pepper says, my grandfather is a physicist and was a colonel in the Air Force. He worked in the Foreign Technology Division in the 70s/80s. There are photos in his office of said invisibility tech.
Oh, yeah. Wow. That is fascinating. In the office. That's quite interesting. Please feel free to shoot us an email at info@darkjournalist.com. I'd like to hear more about that. But when you get to the Foreign Technology Division, Foreign Technology Office, that's the same place where Corso operated the redevelopment of the UFO file out of. So that's a good place to go when you're looking for information on this. The invisibility might be the easiest X-Tech for us to get our hands on now because it's coming out more and more as we go along. Now, let's look at John von Neumann. A couple of interesting things. I could probably sit here for the next 40 minutes and talk about his incredible background. Mathematician, physicist, Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient twice, Eisenhower, for his work in World War II and helping us win, for his work in physics and developing game theory. I mean, his accolades, he literally is one of the most important, powerful people in terms of impact that we've run across. And he's going to be somebody who really, when we understand the UFO file aspect, his role is going to be crucial to understand. What we have is a direct handoff from Robert Sarbacher, who I've cited on this program many times, who is the physicist that's been rubbed out of history predominantly. You don't even find a Wikipedia page, as Olivia is very fond of saying, hey, even the dwarf from The Wizard of Oz has a Wikipedia page. How can you not have the top physicist for the United States in the 50s with his a Wikipedia page. It's quite unusual, very, very unusual, as was his unusual death after going on the record. Let's get this on the record for von Neumann to start to understand the implications that we're not just reviewing the work of a scientist who was around and wasn't it great he made some breakthroughs. This is somebody whose work and whose world we're kind of living under. We're living in von Neumann's world. This is the person who developed transhumanism on the ground. This is the person who developed our modern computing structure on the ground. This is the person who managed the UFO file for 9 years. That's a long time. Okay. In his last years, von Neumann puzzled over the question of whether a machine could reproduce itself. Using an abstract model, cellular automation, von Neumann outlined how a machine could reproduce itself from simple components. This is the early 1950s. And by the way, he put things on record in the 40s that presaged the development of DNA. So this is somebody who really was hardcore in there. Key to this demonstration is that the machine reads its own genetic code, interpreting it first as instructions for constructing the machine exclusive of the code, and second as data. In the second phase, the machine copies its code in order to create a completely fertile new machine. Conceptually, this work anticipated later discoveries in genetics. The impact of that statement ripples through the entire X-Tech, the entire steganography, the entire setup of the advanced technology. This idea of self-replicating machines is crucial. But also creating this idea that you could have a fertile machine and that it could read its own genetic code and reproduce itself is something I can tell you that just wasn't on the record back then, and it's something that's almost even hard to imagine right now. Now, people who were close to von Neumann said that he got the idea when he was working after World War II, and what they were doing, and he was kind of he was in a major think tank at Princeton with people like Einstein. And he got the idea by watching jellyfish being shocked with electricity and their responses to it. And he said, I wonder if, what they're doing is they're actually feeding back the impulses, and machines do that. I wonder if we could make machines act in this kind of way that we have these jellyfish acting and have them reproduce themselves. It sounds very nutty, but apparently this is the fundamental basis from which a lot of transhumanism is working from. The creation of a cybernetic organism gives it the ability to self-perpetuate itself, which would make it equal with humanity, which, be fruitful and multiply. Well, the machines can do the same thing in von Neumann's reality. Von Neumann was from Budapest in Hungary, and he came from a very wealthy family. And as a matter of fact, some very high officials would officiate at his family events. And he was doing work in Germany and studying physics and just, getting incredible things like becoming a professor in his 20s and things like he just didn't hear of. The guy was a true marvel. Let's take just a quick look at some of his accolades here. This is him receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Eisenhower. And like I said, somebody who really was looked at as the key to winning World War II, developing technology to fight the Soviets, win the Cold War, somebody who was really hardcore in the neck of it. And his partner in development at one point was Oppenheimer, who was the other major physicist, along with Sar Barker, who they were thought of as the three major physicists in America. In essence, you still hear about von Neumann. You still hear about Oppenheimer. You do not hear about Sar Barker. And that's very interesting because it's Sar Barker who let the cat out of the bag in the 80s and told us, hey, you know what? Of course we did redevelop UFOs. And of course we found beings associated with them. And I'm not sure why they keep that secret. this was his attitude. And I'm going to read his entire dialogue tonight as well. Something I want to kind of give us a flash in our subconscious of his wife, Clara, who basically developed modern meteorology and gave us the standard on which to build and develop predictive weather patterns. And she worked very often in her career, as she was a computer whiz herself, with basically controlling weather. So these were very advanced people that were coming forward. Now, what's interesting is von Neumann, I'm going to jump ahead and jump back, but he dies at an early age, in his early 50s, and a very sudden illness and of cancer. And his wife is someone who he kind of co-developed all these different programs with and held all those computer secrets along with him. And shortly after he dies, she remarries briefly, actually, to another talented physicist and oceanographer named Eckert. And then, quite unexpectedly, supposedly commits suicide. The story of her suicide is very, very unusual.
I'm not buying it.
I don't blame you. Here's why. Of course, there's a picture of her in happier days with our friend von Neumann. And they both are really living the life. And they've had just an incredible run of working for the government and developing these different programs, developing the original ENIAC machines and computers. This is the foundations of computing. There would be no computer revolution without these people. They literally invented the world that we're in now. The question is, how much did them managing the UFO file have to do with that? And it's a question I think we can answer. But anyway, let's go back just briefly to her suicide, because it's quite unusual. And I think when we look at it, we have to say to ourselves, this is easily detectable as the action of Ex Protect. Now, as a result of her work, Clara's work with John von Neumann, which is ridiculous. At Princeton, they called him Johnny. I can't think of this like.
Well, it's interesting. We're used to scientists at this level because he's truly one of the greatest geniuses, certainly of the 20th century.
Oh, yeah.
Being sort of awkward, socially awkward on the spectrum, and that he was charming. He was like
Mr. Pizzazz.
Yeah, he had a lot of charisma.
But just the idea of hey, Johnny von Neumann. There's an interview with Edward Teller, who basically he basically seems like Ahriman incarnate. But Teller, of course, major developer of these bombs, like the hydrogen bomb, and really like with the guts to use it, as it were, and the insanity to use it, the desire to use it. But Teller is a fascinating character, and when he's going through that whole interview, when he talks about von Neumann, he's like, "Oh, Johnny, he really, what a character he was, Johnny." And I'm looking at this, Hungarian scientific wizard who came over here. It's just like, it's a very American thing to just call him Johnny. Of course, his real name was Johann when he was in Hungary. So when we look at this, though, let's take a look at the action of Ex Protect. So von Neumann dies unexpectedly and young at the age of 52. Then his wife remarries, like I said, and marries Karl Eckert, which seems very unusual to me because Eckert is the protege of Arthur Compton, who had the UFO file along with his brother Eric before Neumann shows up. So it's almost like they're passing, it's like you have to stay in this circle. You have to get married to this guy to stay in this circle of information. So now she supposedly at some point, with all of her knowledge from working with von Neumann, who managed the UFO file for close to a decade, she relocates to La Jolla, California, somewhere near San Diego, with Eckert. She marries him, and then suddenly she just goes for a drive out to the beach. She walks off into the sunset, gets on a pier, and jumps into the water, and that's it. Okay, now, let me tell you something. First of all, people at this level, like Oppenheimer, like Clara, like von Neumann, you don't get to just walk around on a pier without being observed, because people will always think, especially during the Cold War, hey, the Soviets are going to grab her and she'll spill all our secrets when she's tortured. And therefore, what we're going to do is always, like a Secret Service detail, you keep people keeping an eye on it. So the idea of her just driving off and then jumping off a pier doesn't make any sense. The question is, what was it about von Neumann and his wife Clara that they die so quickly within just a few years and very unexpectedly? Clara in this case was younger than von Neumann. So something very, very unusual about it. We've seen, when I mentioned the case of Morris Jessup earlier, suddenly the idea is thrown out there that he develops a rapid depression when nobody really knew him for that. And then suddenly he's got all this information. He's going to drive over to his friend's house and give him the information, and he stops on a highway and he runs the carbon monoxide pipe through his seat and kills himself. This is very much like this action. And Ex-Protect is very well known for doing things in abandoned areas. Somebody shows up and, they're dead alone in a car, or they're drowned, or whatever it happens to be, and there's no witnesses. This is usually the action of Ex-Protect. Whatever it was, whatever Clara's secrets were from working with von Neumann, and they may have eliminated von Neumann also, I'm convinced on a certain level that he had to go. And I think that what was happening was these people were going from Ex-Protect, from that side, over to Ex-Share. They were starting to integrate the idea that they could share this information. Now, I'm going to raise some very controversial information here tonight, because, as you know, we've covered the Nixon time capsule in the story on this show, and that's a story that reaches all the way to the White House and beyond. That type of revelation we've seen more and more common when you study the history of it, as we have in this program, like Eisenhower's X time capsule to be opened in 2053, for example, like LBJ's X letter to be opened in 2023. Of course, in the 90s, they had some kerfuffle and they said, hey, we opened it, but the CIA wants to classify everything in it. But don't worry, it's just about Nixon hanky-panky in 1968. No. The LBJ library has the letter still, and most of the contents remain completely classified. Yes.
I just wanted to say, Epic Journeyman says that Scripps Pier, Pacific Beach Pier, and even Ocean Beach Pier have pretty deep water. Unless you jump early and hit the rocks, she would be fine unless she didn't know how to swim. This is what I was thinking. She's a brilliant woman. This is not how a brilliant person kills themselves, right?
No. Well, if you look at the case, even the police are confused about it. It doesn't really make any sense. But that's interesting information, of course. But here's my really straight point, which is, when you take somebody like that, like if Albert Einstein wants to go walk on a beach, it doesn't work that way. You have a security detail for the reasons I cited. So you can't. You're not in a position where you can go jump off a pier and kill yourself. It just doesn't happen.
Max W. Little was saying mind controlled. So
yeah, that's more like it.
Mm-hmm.
Or just knocked out and then dumped. That's, that seems to me the method that they would use. Whatever it was with Clara, though, she's very, very fascinating, because she is someone who's very much an unsung hero, like I said, developing this early ability to predict the weather. Now, let's think about von Neumann, who, by the way, was a consultant to the Rand Corporation at the time of his death. This is very important to me because the Rand Corporation comes up over and over again around unusual incidents in relation to these people. And I think the balance between Ex-Protect and Ex-Share can be found in those military contractors and the aerospace development, what I could call the military-industrial complex. They're right in the heart there. And if you look back to that speech from 1961, when Eisenhower says, we have to guard against the military-industrial complex, he is the embodiment of Ex-Share saying, we're Ex-Share and they're Ex-Protect, and we have to protect the country against them, because we even if they think that they have their own idea about how to protect the country, we can't allow democracy and the republic to go down the drain because these guys have an idea that they control it all of a sudden. And a lot of this comes out of continuity of government program. But anyway, what I want to say first, before we go any further, is that we're right on the verge of something that's going to be explosive as we get into it. And so prepare yourself, because we're going into those deep waters again, as we have very many times on this program. Now, it turns out von Neumann had a time capsule. Now, we've seen time capsules, as I've cited, and we've seen things called stealth archives. Stealth archives are things that we know exist, but we can't get at them. I would definitely call the time capsules stealth archives. The Nixon time capsule is something that Robert Merritt, who was a operative for the Houston Plan, came forward on this program, the Houston Plan being still classified to this day, but something which we know existed during the Nixon administration and which was cited by the Church Committee. And Robert Merritt's association with the whole Watergate-Nixon period is well documented, so we don't have to guess at that. His role as an informant has been confirmed by sources as lofty as the New York Times. So what was it that Merritt said? On this program about a year ago now, and the episode is called The Nixon Time Capsule. Robert Merritt's story of working with Nixon is that when he was in the Houston Plan was basically a White House intelligence unit. That way the CIA couldn't blackmail the president. And we've seen them use this technique before, but it eventually took Nixon down because when he used it during Watergate, there were people like E. Howard Hunt, who showed up earlier in our story, who were caught in the Watergate, and they were this group called the Plumbers. Again, it's an internal White House intelligence unit of a small amount of people, maybe about half dozen people. So what happens there is you're able to control the information, but if anything goes wrong and it tracks back to the White House, then you're dead meat, which is what happened with Watergate. But before that, they were using Merritt in the Houston Plan. So Merritt, as a whistleblower, wasn't somebody that we had to guess if his information was any good or not. He was on the record. What he came forward and said fundamentally was that Nixon told him that he was keeping a time capsule in the White House now that he was being forced from office during the Watergate scandal, and that the time capsule contained information about an energy formula that would make America energy independent. This is very important because if you review the period of time, there are all kinds of things going on, like the Arab oil crisis, etc., and that is the major question of the day. Now, there are all these rumors from the period that Nixon was devising something at Pine Gap for the same use. So apparently they were using what they were getting at Los Alamos from an off-world source, this energy formula, and they were going to develop it at Pine Gap. What happens instead is Nixon gets ousted, and the person who's going to pull the plug, the Prime Minister Gough, over there in Australia, also gets dethroned by the Governor General on the order of the Queen. These are things that are historical actions, and they're very easy to go back and look at. And there are different interpretations that are applied to them. But in essence, what Robert Merritt was saying was that Nixon, seeing the predicament that he was in, working on this alternative energy thing, when Watergate happened, he realized his presidency was over, but he wanted to record the fact of what he had developed working side by side with what is actually CIA Blue Book, not Project Blue Book, which is just the public whitewash. And why anybody wants to go back and re-examine that on television shows, I have no idea, because it was a whitewash to start with. But CIA Blue Book, we know that Nixon was in charge of. And so when he gets to 1972 and the Watergate break-in happens, he tells Merritt that he reads him the letter that he's keeping as kind of the time capsule for the American people, and he has him deliver a copy to Henry Kissinger. So this is all well recorded in my video interview with Merritt, which you can go and review. But what's very interesting is that that time capsule is all about relating to this planet X and this energy formula. We have the X steganography in the reference to planet X. The X steganography showing up in the X letter for LBJ saying, open this envelope in 2023, 50 years. 50 years is a pattern that's used over and over, by the way, by the mystery schools, which is save the information for 50 years and let it out. But now let's look at von Neumann and his time capsule. Before we get to it, I want to remind everyone you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Wow, a fantastic crowd. We're going to take your questions in the second half of the program with Miss Olivia. And Miss Olivia, while I get the information on von Neumann's time capsule, what do you got over there?
PM Chen was asking, what do you think Henry Kissinger did with the Nixon file?
There's no question that he got it. He confirmed it with Merritt, and I asked Merritt that question about 16 different ways, and I always got the same answer, which is the confirmation came through. I think it's to the great kind of, well, it's a great failure on behalf of the alternative community that it's fundamentally my research into the Nixon time capsule, you know, and what's brought forward from Robert Merritt, in that the kind of larger players involved in the UFO field have not, you know, they're still talking about, hey, did Jackie Gleason show Nixon, you know, did Nixon show Jackie Gleason aliens? I mean, we can do a lot better than that. Robert Merritt's still alive. You know, I've got the information. It's there. You know, Snopes even covered it and try to do their dance with it. And we know it showed up in a number of unusual places, but the alternative media seems to be stuck on, you know, this kind of hamster wheel of marketing and intel whitewash. And so, you know, cabal arrests and junk like that, when we have a real fundamental item of interest, which is a genuine person who worked inside the Houston plan telling us that Nixon kept the UFO disclosure time capsule, a copy of it, in the White House, and that he hid it there. It seems to me that's, you know, much more poignant, a much more powerful thing than to run after imaginary Gitmo arrests or something like that. But whatever suits your fancy. But I'm saying on record, the UFO investigator who did the best job on this with me was Linda Moulton Howe. And you know, it's very interesting because, as a little aside, we saw this week that Linda Moulton Howe called out some of the shenanigans of these kind of marketeers, New Age marketeers and cult players, plagiarizing her work regarding Antarctica. And, you know, I think there's a real dividing line between solid information that can help, you know, because we're under tremendous pressure by mainstream media propaganda anyway. When you get propaganda and marketeer activity inside the alternative media, then you're really up a creek without a paddle. So at least in the alternative independent media, that stuff has to be fought off and booted out and exposed. And I think this is very much what Linda Moulton Howe did this week, and I applauded her for it, and I've promoted that. And you know, Linda's a good friend, and this is somebody with years, almost 5 decades of service in journalism. And, you know, you can't just kind of go around grabbing her work without a fight. So we've seen that this has happened with her before. It's actually one of the first things that I pointed out in relation to these the activities of these marketeers. So that said, you know, Linda did the right thing with the time capsule story, which is she talked to Merritt. You know, we talked about it. We did an episode on Coast to Coast about it. But, you know, the vast majority of the independent outlets, the vast majority of the alternative outlets, they seem to want to get you, like I said, on a hamster wheel of bad headlines, phony stories, you know, all the way from Nibiru to Gitmo and beyond. And I think there's a much better way to go. There's solid people. We have in the alternative independent media, solid people. Incredible. You have Joseph Farrell, Catherine Austin Fitz. You know, so we have to ask ourselves, where are we going to waste our time on the junk and miss the important stories? Robert Merritt, you know, his story, he's still alive. He's still with us. He has a terminal illness, but right now he's with us. So it's very interesting to me, the things that happen to kind of try to push these stories away. But let's find something now that relates very much to the Nixon time capsule, which is John von Neumann, who we started with. And von Neumann is the key figure inside of the UFO file. Now, just a quick flash before we go to his time capsule, which is, how is it that we know that von Neumann controlled this? There's actually a lot of very interesting data to this effect, but particularly it's Robert Sarbacher's info. And Robert Sarbacher, as a physicist, is somebody who fundamentally gave us information in the 80s when he was pursued by William Steinman for a very unusual book called Crash at Aztec. And I have to say, Steinman only did that book and a few other things and then kind of retreated off to his own world. And, you know, everything that we knew about Steinman is that he really went in there and plugged away to get the story. And he came out with some amazing, amazing details, which have led us to understand Kissinger's role with the Rockefellers in developing information around the UFO file. But he also gave us this incredible push towards Robert Sarbacher, who he actually contacted, and Sar Barker was retired at the time. And Steinman was sending him these letters and just saying, you know, I really want to know about your work around the UFO file. Can you give me these details? Apparently, in 1950, Wilbert Smith said, who was a Canadian government official, that you said X, 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 and X. Is that true? And so eventually, like 8 months later, Sar Barker got back in touch with me. He's like, oh, you know, I was away or whatever it was. I'm very happy to answer your questions. As a matter of fact, you know, yes, I worked on the UFO file and we worked on crashes. And as it turned out, you know, I thought that they were going to release this stuff already. I have no idea why they continued the secrecy. This is 1983, 1984. I'm going to read you a few things from some of these interactions that he had once he was opened up to UFO investigators, including Stanton Friedman and William Steinman. Now, this is Robert Sarbacher, close friend to Thomas Townsend Brown. Keep that in mind. Very representative of ex-Share. Sarbacher, in the early 80s, is giving this information out. And I quote, let's see. So it was Sar Barker, of course, and his first interview was with Wilbert Smith in September 1950. And so this conversation takes place in Florida. So they're asking him who was controlling the UFO file, and he said, well, it's Karl Compton after Vannevar Bush. This lineage is very, very important. It's not paid attention to enough. Instead, we get the whitewash. Oh, MJ-12, is it real or is it not? How about a conversation with someone who was there and forget about that? Okay. Quote, they asked him, you know, what was going on with it. And he said, I was told that they had recovered a UFO with some people in it. This is Sar Barker. And then they said, bodies? He says, I don't know. That's what I think. And then he says, did he tell you where? Talking about, did Compton say where they recovered the bodies? He said, well, we were having a meeting at Wright Field and I couldn't go. But later on, one of the fellows who were working on the UFO file said to me that those guys, if they were people, were made like insects. They didn't have any skin on their bodies. This is a top American physicist now talking about the information of people looking at a crashed off-world vehicle and the people who were inside, the beings that were inside. He's describing. This is not, you know, somebody's story. This is Sar Barker on the record. Sar Barker continues. So they were saying that's how they were able to accelerate and decelerate without being torn apart. You see, if we were going 1,000 miles a second and stopped in a minute, well, we would be squished. And then the questioner goes, not quite, but, and Sar Barker said, well, it's pretty bad. Okay, so they go back and forth a little bit more. And Sar Barker said, the question was, okay, did they imply the crash had just happened or that this had happened sometime before? And Sar Barker says, yes, the conversation was that it had been recovered. So on the record, top physicists saying they had recovered the craft and they were redeveloping it. It crashed. That's what they were talking about. And then he goes that in this case, it was the early 50s he was talking about. Now, he said that it was classified 2 points higher even than the hydrogen bomb. In fact, it was the most highly classified subject in the U.S. government at the present time, in the early 50s. So the most highly classified subject in the U.S. government at the present time was the UFO file. The UFO file was where the X-Tech resided, and all this stuff was in it, which is they're defining these advanced craft and these strange insect-like bodies. And then he says, who else, the question is, who else was involved besides Vannevar Bush, who Sar Barker said ran the program? We've gone into Vannevar Bush before. We'll keep rolling. Well, after Bush left, somebody else came in, Karl Compton, and then he goes on further and says, oh, he had, Bush had to go off to be the director of the Carnegie Foundation and so on. As we go along, he said that one of the crashes were in New Mexico, and being in New Mexico in 1947, it was probably Oppenheimer who was working with it also. Then he names James Killian. He goes on to bring in Los Alamos and then talk about how John von Neumann is the person who took over the UFO file at that point. So there we have on record Sar Barker, who now a year and a half after these interviews came out, there is a story that is told by his family and that other UFO researchers have come out with, which is that the day that he entered the hospital, it was a normal day. It started off normal, and he found what was apparently like a jelly-like substance on his car door and on the handle. And that when he drove himself into town, he made a call to a family member saying, I'm checking myself into the hospital. It's weird. There was some goo, some like jelly stuff on my car handle, and I haven't felt right ever since. And then he went into the hospital, and then he died shortly afterwards. Very interesting and unusual, and very ex-protect there from this point of view. Now, to try to think about what they're protecting. Yes, Ms. Olivia.
JJK was asking what year did the interviews come out?
Well, it was very tricky about when they came out and when they were done, because they were done in 83 and 84, and people couldn't believe what they had. And it started to finally come out about a year after that, because no one could actually believe that this wasn't a fake interview. But as it turns out, they were recorded. He had letters on his stationery. He had signed it, etc. Everyone knew. And his son later confirmed it as well. Now, Sar Barker was so deep inside of the UFO file, he just couldn't believe that the government was continuing to keep the secret at that point. But he did the ultimate thing that they don't want you to do, and this is the reason you can't find Sar Barker's Wikipedia page. If you try, you're going to find something that says this person doesn't exist. The reason is because X-Protect, their whole rule is secrecy. So if you're not putting out a disinformation story and just tell it like it is, that's the ultimate. Basically, you violate the secrecy, you're out. And that's when they use lethal force. Now, what's interesting is when we look at von Neumann in this context, now Sar Barker has identified him as controlling the UFO file. So von Neumann controlling the UFO file, he's done these incredible things. He's a math genius. He and his wife both die within a short period, and his wife in that unusual suicide. So we know that something is going on here beyond what we're told on the official side of it. So we have to start to kind of get an idea that there's an X-Protect, X-Share problem going on here, which is he was originally with the X-Protect group because he was deep in the war effort. But as the 50s were starting to open up, and when he dies in 1958, by that time, he's thinking we need to move this stuff out. He's with the X-Share group. This is what I'm coming to the conclusion of, and it looks to me like the time capsules, the stealth archives, are the thing that give us the signal for who's going into the X-Share camp, because the time capsule represents sharing the information. Now, we all know the Kennedy story, that he tried to share the information, and we know that we have on record from Douglas Caddy that E. Howard Hunt said that he was eliminated for trying to do that. So that's a classic example of X-share in this case. But let's look now at von Neumann and his time capsule, because this is something you never hear about. And it's quite unusual the way that it was snuffed out once it was brought up. But watch the tangled web we weave when we try to, when X-Protect tries to smother a story. And then I'm going to bring the Georgia Guidestones into this. And believe it or not, they all relate to each other. I'm going to remind everyone, you're with us here on the Dark Journalists program. Go to darkjournalists.com, sign up for the newsletter, and stay in touch with us. That's the way to do it. They're throwing people off of social media left and right. Why leave it to chance? Go to the site. The newsletter is free, and make sure that it's something where we have kind of a pipeline of communication. Because otherwise, these guys are controlling the game. And at some point, they're going to get together at Davos and say, that dark journalist guy, we've got to get him off YouTube too. And we've already seen a lot of shadow banning with the show. Now, make sure that you get that done. And also a programming note, like I wanted to mention tomorrow night, an unusual show, episode 50 of the X series. It's our 1-year anniversary with it. And that's going to be a very special show with Gigi Young. And we're going to be covering Rudolf Steiner and anthroposophy and the planetary seals and the great mystery that he left behind there for us. Yes.
Okay, I have to ask this question now.
Okay.
Okay, so this is from a cult fan. Is von Neumann the death card because death is transformation and cybernetics seeks to transform humanity into a slave race monitored by a central hub of machines and social scores?
Well, that's a pretty good interpretation, I would say. Well, you've definitely been paying attention. I think that there's a lot of reasons why he could be the death card. It seems fundamentally to me that whatever it is about the self-replicating machines represents a risk, the death to humanity. But then again, managing the UFO file for close to a decade and being the death card might be even more powerful to look at. And I want to get into this thing about self-replicating machines because it may be through his work with the UFO file that he got the idea in the first place, because of a number of very interesting stories relating to off-world civilizations transferring consciousness through a series of clones that they send out to do kind of mechanical activities and come back and dump the information out. That gets very complex, but I think you can see where that's going, and maybe I'll go a little further with that when the time comes. But in any case, the reason that he's the death card, I think, has to be studied because it's a crucial factor. Von Neumann's time capsule. Are you ready? You ready for this very unusual twisting story that just lands right in the middle of our X-steganography research? Okay, let's start with this. In the early 50s, von Neumann became deeply involved in military consulting. This is from Stephen Wolfram, who was a major mathematician. And he happened to know von Neumann's only daughter, Marina, who is in her 80s now. And this woman, I have to tell you, the resume of this woman is off the charts, including being in charge of a steering committee for the Bilderberg Group and the VP of General Motors. She's probably one of the most well-connected people in history.
It's terrifying, actually.
Yeah, I've never seen anything like it. And I do feel like she's a very accomplished woman. And but apparently in private conversation now, as we'll find out here, she talks to Stephen Wolfram in 2003 and says some very interesting things. Let's start with this. Von Neumann seems to have been quite flattered that he was called upon to do all this Cold War consulting, and he certainly treated the government with considerably more respect than many other scientists of his day, except sometimes in his exuberance to demonstrate his mathematical calculational prowess, which, by the way, he was a child prodigy. He seems to have always been quite mature and diplomatic. The transcript of his testimony at the Oppenheimer security hearing certainly bears this out. Nevertheless, von Neumann's military consulting involvements left some factions quite negative about him. It's sometimes said, for example, that von Neumann might have been the model for the sinister Dr. Strangelove character in Stanley Kubrick's movie of the same name, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. Indeed, von Neumann was in a wheelchair for the last year of his life. This is very interesting to me because von Neumann, coming out of Hungary, like Teller, had a vicious hatred of Russia because of the incredible power politics and the clampdowns and things. And so when they got into this situation, what they wanted to do was basically bomb their enemy. And they regarded them as such an enemy, they said, you can never allow them to get the kind of nuclear prowess that we have. Tell you what, take them out now. They were part of the take them out crowd for a while. But it seems to me that von Neumann changed, even though this was the spin in this guy's article. Okay, we'll keep going and listen closely. I recently met von Neumann's only child. Remember, this is December 28th, 2003. His daughter, Marina, who herself has had a distinguished career, mostly at General Motors. Yeah, and about 12 other deep state operations. No, she really, I mean, Bilderberg, this woman is incredibly accomplished. She reinforced my impression that until his unpleasant final illness, von Neumann was a happy, energetic man working long hours on mathematical topics and having fun. Quote, she told me that when he died, he left a box that he directed should be opened 50 years after his death. This is von Neumann. What does it contain? His last sober predictions of a future we have now seen? It'll be most interesting in 2007 to find out. February 8th, 2007. Stephen Wolfram. At the end of my post about the 100th anniversary of John von Neumann's birth, I mentioned that his daughter had told me about a box to be opened on the 50th anniversary of his death. That anniversary is today. And being reminded this last week, I sent an email to his daughter to ask what had become of the box. Yes. Disappointingly, she responded, the big box opening turned out to be a bust. Apparently, we had all assembled only to discover, oh, it's a big mistake. The box had disappeared. Then the box was not John Neumann's at all. Wolfram says, perhaps it was for the best. Von Neumann's daughter sent me a piece she wrote about him describing how he pointed out the unpredictability of technological and other change and expressed his concern that our species might wipe itself by the year 1980. Of course, the box had disappeared. Okay, so here's what we got. Von Neumann follows in the tradition of the Nixon time capsule, LBJ's capsule, Eisenhower's Project X time capsule. He's got this box that should be opened upon his death in 2008. They go to do it, and before this, in 2003, our friend here, the mathematician Wolfram, lets the secret out that von Neumann has this box. 5 years later, when he does the follow-up, the daughter dutifully plays out the story. Oh, it was, no, it just disappeared. It wasn't John von Neumann's box. It was whatever. Let's listen before the cover story is put out. Let's listen to what he said about it. Quote, she told me that when he died, he left a box that he directed should be opened only 50 years after his death. Now, why would von Neumann, who ran the UFO File, have a time capsule to be opened in 2008? The same reason that Nixon had his time capsule, or Johnson had his, or Eisenhower had his, or that Kennedy tried to share this in the first place, on the idea that at some point, predicting fundamentally, and as we look into Reagan, we find it also, they understand that at some point this stuff is going to get disclosed. And the off-world civilization and the X technology, they presume, is going to get out. And they want their role recorded properly for history for what they did with it. Hey, I worked on this project. Hey, we got this in Los Alamos, which was an energy formula, which could save the world. Hey, we had very delicate negotiations trying to keep this secret for 40 years from the Russians, who were our enemy. They want these things let out. That is the X-share side. They want to share for their own purposes this information, but they also figure that culture will move forward. That's X-share. X-protect. Lock down in the time capsule. Eliminate the witnesses. Eliminate the wife. Eliminate the researchers. Push back on the story. Roll out phony CIA versions of the UFO disclosure story. Put out CIA dummy corporations to launch projects and t-shirts for disclosure. That's all activity that falls under the misinformation counterintelligence wing. That's all X-protect. When you get the CIA involved on the UFO issue, X-protect is right there with them. So this story of von Neumann and his time capsule is so interesting to me because I want to know, because we have some idea of Nixon's time capsule because he read the letter to Merritt after all, and Merritt had an incredible memory and recalled a great deal of it. But what was in von Neumann's time capsule? What was it that he wanted people to know that he had done managing the UFO file for 9 years, as Sar Barker had told us? By the way, Sar Barker was also eliminated by X-protect. So you can see now, when we get around the X technology in terms of its impact on the culture, what do we get instead? You get the big-eyed, bug-eyed grays. You get denial and denial for years and years and years. And now we have this kind of phony idea of a tip and a threat. And the closest you can get to disclosure is John Podesta. I mean, come on. So we're really in the woods in relation to this issue. And until we understand X-protect's role in relation to the X-share people, and again, X-share, think Thomas Townsend Brown, think von Neumann at the end of his life, think JFK's effort, think of Reagan inserting it in his speeches and saying, if we were facing a threat. Think of Gorbachev recently, at the New York Press Club, giving the story of how Reagan pulled him aside and said, if there's an attack on us from off-world sources, will you help us? And being dead serious. Well, I'll tell you, when Gorbachev made that story, it blew everybody's mind. And by the way, Charlie Rose was sitting there, and shortly after that, that weird sex scandal got him out. Kissinger was in the audience, and he looked like he was going to die on the spot. Nobody wanted that information out. This was Gorbachev ad hoc, and that's X-share.
Off the script.
Yes, big time, in a major way. So now I'm going to keep moving here on the subject, but Miss Olivia, why don't you?
I just want to mention that Joseph is in the audience.
Hey, Joseph.
And that he just finished his new book.
Yeah, did he? Unbelievable. Now, when is it going to come out?
I think it's going to Lulu very soon.
All we know about this book is that in the title it says "and the." We have a lot of exciting books coming out, which is quite fascinating because we know Walter Bosley just did Esoteric Napoleon. And it seems to me, we're hosting this event on May 25th, which I am happy to report has sold out.
Sold out. With
Graham Hancock here in Cambridge, in Harvard Square. And this is going to be something special because it's on Graham's book, America Before. And that's going to be a very, very special thing. And I'll tell you, America Before, which comes out April 22nd, is raising intense anticipation for it because Graham, as we know, did Fingerprints of the Gods and Underworld and all these amazing, groundbreaking books, and then took a great deal of time off for self-discovery, working around the ayahuasca research and writing fiction, incredible things. But the incredible relief that we got in 2015 when he came back and wrote Magicians of the Gods and now America Before, really getting us to that advanced culture that was here in America before this massive comet strike and the great change that took place. Understanding that culture, that gets us close to everything. When we talk about the hot zone, for example, that ancient culture that was advanced and that was pointed out by Casey and sources like Steiner, right there in the hot zone between Bimini, Cuba, and Yucatan. That is all related, and it's such a major piece of it. So this year, the incredible books are coming out. And I also understand Andrew Collins is doing a book on Atlantis. So we just have incredible stuff. But Joseph's book, let me tell you, we're going to have him on the minute that book comes out, but we're going to get him on actually before then. So we have to get you in.
He says it 2 weeks.
Okay, good, good.
Available.
Fantastic.
And that, oh, Daniel, you're going to eat this new book up.
Well, I'll tell you, I have to go through the last book, which was so amazing and pulled together so many interesting topics. I read that book through and through, and then found myself going back chapter by chapter because it is loaded with details. That's Microcosm and Medium. That one's available now on lulu.com, and I highly recommend it because it ties together so many different forces that we're seeing in our culture today versus the incredible background and past that we have, and the influence I see of the mystery schools and all this as well. That book definitely does one of the things that the X series does, which is it moves through time. And I think that this is the crucial thing we need to do in this period. It's almost like we have to go quantum to understand anything. But that's fantastic. Here's something in relation to the Georgia Guidestones on the time capsule issue. I wanted to point this out because, I think that the time capsule aspect has to be understood as not just one story. It's a phenomenon. It is about these stealth archives that are there that we know about that we can't get our hands on. This is an important aspect. So they took von Neumann's time capsule away. That story never should have got out. It got out through her conversation with a mathematician. 5 years later, she had to deny it and be like, oh, it wasn't even, it disappeared first, and then next, oh, it wasn't even his box. What? You told him that he said you had to open the box for 50 years. It wasn't his box. Whose was it? And was that like a weird way to say, was it Clara's box? And was she bumped off because of it? Because we know she supposedly committed suicide? This is very, very interesting. But now let's look at the Georgia Guidestones just briefly, because this is just one little snapshot section.
Before you go into that, can I just ask you a question?
Yes.
Whenever you talk about time capsules,
the
envelopes at Bush's funeral always come up. So Scarlet Fire wanted to know if you knew or had any theory of what was in the envelopes.
I like Catherine Austin Fitt's theory that basically somewhere there, and I'm not happy about this, but that the Bushes and the Trumps made some sort of a armistice, and that's why the Clintons were so ticked off. Could well be. After seeing William Barr installed as the Attorney General, that's Bush's. That's somebody who goes back with Bush, not to Bush as VP, but Bush as CIA director in '76. He's his legal counsel, and also the whole Iran-Contra part. He's there for that too. So Barr is an incredible deep state operator. I'm amazed that Trump nominated him to be the kind of Attorney General. This was a remarkable thing, but I think we're seeing a lot of trade-offs and a lot of Bush people coming on board with the Trump administration, which is a very, very disturbing trend. And all that kind of patriot movement stuff should probably be looking more at that. I would think. Okay. Really interesting. On the Georgia Guidestones, let's take just a quick look at that, and then I'm going to read it to you. Astronomic features. Channel through stone indicates celestial poles. Horizontal slot indicates annual travel of sun. Sunbeam through capstone marks noontime throughout the year. They're actually describing the function of the the Guidestones. Of course, I want to tie the Guidestones in directly to the X-steganography. There's no question from the air. It's definitely an X formation, as are many ancient buildings. And there's a lot of sinister connotations to the Georgia Guidestones because of the population aspect. And I'm willing to entertain all sides of this one. But let's get through something interesting. Author R.C. Christian, a pseudonym. Right. We know that. R.C. Christian, Rosicrucian, some indication of a knowledge of mystery schools there. No question about it. Sponsors a small group of Americans who seek the age of reason. Right. Thomas Paine. Very unusual. Then at the bottom here, it says time capsule. Time capsule placed 6 feet below this spot on blank to be opened on blank. 6 feet below this spot. Of course, you can imagine how many people have tried to just dig on that spot. We know that in the case of the LBJ library, this is what he left, where it said, to be opened by the director of the Lyndon Baines Johnson Library, not earlier than 50 years from the date, June 26th, 1973. That's his 50 years. We've got the Georgia Guidestone time capsule. Now we have John von Neumann's time capsule, which disappeared. And of course, all the hubbub that I unleashed last year with a series of episodes with Robert Merritt. And Merritt's story of having been in the Houston plan, no one can doubt that he was working in those clandestine organizations. He's a Watergate figure that whole period. I mean, if you look at books, it's understood that he was an informant. And if you look at the work that he's done with Caddy, et cetera, I mean, it's undeniable his role there. So for him to come out and say this, we have a whole pattern there. If we track back to Nixon, to Eisenhower, and Eisenhower, what does he have? Well, Eisenhower, according to Evan Thomas, okay, this is a mainstream source. Evan Thomas was the editor for Newsweek. I mean, he's not exactly an alternative researcher. What did he say? Eisenhower had a 100-year time capsule called Project X. So it's fundamentally on the record. One last thing in relation to the Georgia Guidestones. They seem to be demonstrating X-share principles on the stones. This is what I find very unusual about them. But on this stone, they have that whole thing about unite humanity with a living new language, etc. And then they have balance personal rights with social duties, prize truth, beauty, love, seeking harmony of the infinite. Leave room for nature, leave room for nature. This has the flavor of almost like Sir Francis Bacon, or, it's got that New Atlantis feeling to it. I'd like us to take a real look at what's going on with the Georgia Guidestones and that story inside the context of what we have here, because the time capsule edge is also running through the story of the Georgia Guidestones. I think the closer we get to understanding things like von Neumann's role, which Sar Barker had pointed out. Sar Barker, remember, the top physicist in America in 1952, celebrated. Saturday Evening Post. He was the cover of Saturday Evening Post. He's eliminated in history. I mean, you will find references to him. I'm just saying he's not celebrated. You're not going to find a PBS special about him like you will about Oppenheimer, for example. And you won't even find a Wikipedia page. Non-person, right? Put him down the memory hole. He let out the UFO file secret, which was that, yes, we did work on it. We did try to redevelop these things. Here was the structure arrangement. Vannevar Bush headed up the program. He called me in. Who else did he have? Who took over? Arthur Compton's brother, Karl Compton, Oppenheimer, so on. Then he gets to von Neumann, who controls the file for many years. Von Neumann's amazing background, putting together very, very unusual advances in physics, in math, game theory. I mean, if you look for who started all of these things, you're going to go back to von Neumann. Let's pause and look at what the CERN tarot deck has him. And remember, this is a project developed inside CERN. What they wanted to say to the world in relation to these things. They've got von Neumann there as the death card, as I pointed out. Let's go back to this for a minute. What are they trying to tell us? They list in there the Macy conferences. He's a core group member. The Macy conferences are all about what? Cybernetics. The transhumanist push that we see inside of what they're trying to, von Neumann's career, what they're trying to highlight, and then calling him the death card. I think we can take this information further. We're going somewhere further with it because of the fact that we now have the story of the von Neumann time capsule on the record via his daughter, who, like I said, is a steering member for the Bilderberg Group. I mean, it's a very high-level position. She's in her 80s now. I don't expect her to ever talk about that time capsule again. However, she did let the secret out to Stephen Wolfram. She was on the record. She said, 50 years, he wants us to let it out. That would have been 2008. And then there's the weird cover story dropped at the last minute. These are important intervals, important things where we can understand these two groups, X Protect and X Share. X Protect, secrecy at all costs. The UFO File, the X technology. Those things run through government agencies using X steganography. The X Share group, same knowledge base. It's in many ways the same power structure. The Kennedy administration is very much an X Share administration. And I would say if you're looking on an administration level, the Bush administration very much an X Protect level. So when we look at these various aspects, we can see that structure of secrecy develops inside where? The continuity of government programs. Because what happens in continuity of government? It's such secret planning that even Congress can't get a look at it. Because the idea, if anything leaks out about this, this is our secret government in case we get nuked. That was the idea when they set it up in the 50s. Peter Dale Scott tracks the players. Strangely enough, he makes a very interesting observation in his book, The American Deep State. The players inside the continuity of government group always show up in deep events in history, all the way from the JFK assassination through the financial crisis of 2008. In 2001, the two players who were part of COG were Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney. In the 80s, during Iran-Contra, we've got Oliver North, who is fundamentally building COG. And if you go back to the 70s, what's very strange is that John Dean, who is the person who puts, who basically gets Nixon to resign, who is, by the way, his lawyer, it's not usually the kind of guy who you expect would get you to resign. He's the one who dimes on Nixon. But where did he work? What was his job before he was working for Nixon? He came right out of the continuity government structure. If you go back to the Kennedy assassination, the Secret Service agent who planned the Dallas trip and the unusual route and everything else, Peter Dale Scott identifies him as what? Working with the Emergency Communication Network. He's part of COG. So COG, in what I'm calling X Protect, to kind of simplify what we have here, X Share and X Protect. The X Protect group willing to lock down, willing to play the wall of secrecy till the last man for power's sake. And maybe using excuses like the public can't handle it and things like this. X-Share have seen the same information. They've seen the X technology. They've seen the UFO file. They have access to the information, and they say, we can share it with the public. We can share it with other countries. These are two very different points of view. And what I like so much when we go into the Kennedy information is you can see a real split between X-Share and X-Protect. And I think that's something that can guide us in terms of, even though the situation is from 50 years ago, it can guide us as to where, on the public level, that battle, where it was at. And I think that we have enough on record through the shows that we've done here that the Kennedy assassination had there's a major piece of the UFO file puzzle in there that is the motivation for removing him in the first place. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Miss Olivia. I know that was a long run, but I hope we at least scratch the surface on von Neumann. Before actually we jump to that, I have something, Olivia. Do you remember the Martians?
Oh, I forgot all about that.
Incredible. I was shocked by this, and I'm just going to put it in on the record. And by the way, you know, I certainly, I'm going to have you make of it what you will. There's something that's well known in mathematic and scientific circles. And they call themselves the Martians. And interestingly enough, our friend von Neumann was one of the Martians. Now, what do you mean he's a Martian? What are you talking about? I'm going to tell you. These scientists, since they all spoke English with a strong accent, were considered outsiders in American society. The Hungarian scientists were seemingly superhuman in intellect, spoke an incomprehensible native language, and came from a small, obscure country. This led to them being called Martians, a name they jocularly adopted. The joke was that the Hungarian scientists are actually descendants of a Martian scout force which landed in Budapest around the year 1900 and later departed after the planet was found unsuitable, but leaving behind children by several Earth women. I kid you not, this is one of those official strange things. Let's keep going. John von Neumann used a number of facts as mock evidence to support this claim. This is von Neumann again, toying with this alien idea. On the record. One of the claims he used was the close geographic proximity of the Martians' birthplaces. The well-traceable career path, which started with an interest in chemistry, led the individual in question to German universities, where he moved towards physics, at which point the Martian left Europe for the United States. The original story from Jorgi Marx's book, The Martians, covering these scientists, ready. Quote, "The universe is vast, containing myriad of stars." This is von Neumann being quoted by Marx in the book The Martians. "The universe is vast, containing myriad of stars likely to have planets circling around them. The simplest living things will multiply, evolve by natural selection, become more complicated, till eventually active thinking creatures will emerge. Yearning for fresh worlds, they should spread out all over the galaxy. These highly exceptional and talented people could hardly overlook such a beautiful place as our Earth. And so Fermi came to this overwhelming question." This is still inside the quote. "If all this has been happening, they should have arrived here by now, so where are they?" It was Leo Szilard, a man with an impish sense of humor, who supplied the perfect reply to the Fermi paradox. "They are among us," he said, "but they call themselves Hungarians." Now, one little thing to pin on the end of this very unusual Martian connection with Neumann. When the question was put to Edward Teller, he noted he was particularly proud of his monogram, ET, an abbreviation for extraterrestrial. Teller, as we know, shows up in very unusual circumstances in stories relating to Reagan and SDI and the whole off-world threat that they were contending with, which Reagan took Gorbachev aside, looked him in the eye and said, on record now from Gorbachev, will you help us if we're attacked by an off-world force? And that Gorbachev said yes. And then Reagan said, don't worry, we'll help you too. And being dead serious. He wanted to stress that, even though Charlie Rose was trying to do anything to have nervous laughter, something to get him out of this mess, because he's just sitting there while Gorbachev is feeding this off, and George Shultz is sitting there, about to fall off his chair. So the final thing from Marx on this book is, according to Marx, the extraterrestrial origin of the Hungarian scientists is proved by the fact that the names von Neumann and Theodor von Karman cannot be found on the map of Budapest, but on the moon are craters bearing their names. In fact, there is a von Neumann crater on the moon. And now, Miss Olivia, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay.
Your questions.
So Soft Alloy 07 says X Protect equals COG equals deep state.
Yeah, I want you to think of X Protect as highly, highly compartmentalized. So I think you'd have to think of this and say, when you say the deep state, I think there are things we can point to that we know are deep state. X Protect is very unusual. When we looked at the strange things that we were looking at in relation to the Men in Black and the strange stories of them disappearing, even Dan Aykroyd, who's a very public figure, has a Men in Black story and them disappearing. The use of invisibility technology, the use of this kind of astral agency, and the unusual reference to them looking like the Sami people, who was this, kind of very incredible culture there, which even Renee Zellweger is a Sami, so you can get some idea of the look. I think that we really have to think of X Protect as highly specialized, like a highly compartmentalized group. And it seems to me that looking at work over years, the people like Garrison and seem to point to them being inside of aerospace, that it has something to do somehow that this technology at a certain point that what they were working on, let's call it just the X technology inside the UFO file. That technology, they realized if you keep it at a government level, there's going to be a way for it to get tracked. So the way that we can get out of that is if you corporatize it and then you keep it as part of the company's corporate holdings, then the public can't ask them because they're, a private company and you can't get a Freedom of Information request. But at some point during Eisenhower's administration, they lost control of the development of this. And there is a story of Eisenhower threatening to invade Area 51 if the CIA didn't give him a briefing the following day. That story, very good whistleblower for that story. And there's always been rumors of Eisenhower's tension with Area 51 and the CIA. When you look at it that way, and then you look at Walter Dornberger's dominance of the X planes, the secretive X planes, which represent the very heart of the X technology, and how they still hold records. As we pointed out, the X-15, Dornberger's prize, still holds the record for speed by a space plane, a manned space plane, launched in 1959. That's quite remarkable. It's 60 years ago. How does it still hold the record? I mean, there's a lot of very unusual questions. Where did all that technology go? It's funny, we have Dr. Farrell in the chat because he makes a really great examination of the fact that we didn't the technology that we use to get to the moon, that technology is not on record, which is why it was easy for it to be scrapped and for the program to go black. This is the X steganography. This is the X black project mix that I'm talking about. And it's funny, of course, and I've gone into Dornberger's past, being von Braun's boss. I mean, he's a very crucial figure. And then he's one of the high ups at Bell Helicopter. And he's the one who's in charge of the X-plane program. So, we've got some very unusual things there. I've shown how Dornberger actually, there are dinner records at the White House that have Dornberger showing up at the Nixon White House. So he's still active in this X technology program, even when Nixon gets in. And of course, Nixon was very close to those paperclip scientists. So there's a big story there that we just don't know a damn thing about. And it is in the pursuit of this avenue, I think, that we're going down. Okay, that was a long answer, but go.
All right, so soft alloy 07 again. This is long, but is X Protect in existence when these time capsules are placed? If so, why tell these people exactly where the time capsules are located? If I were an X Protect agent, I would retrieve those time capsules for obvious reason. Isn't it kind of naive to openly discuss these time capsules in the first place with all that secrecy?
Here's how the time capsules work, in my opinion. They know that the subject is secret at the time, but they're given the indication, or they themselves assume, that after 50 years, it's going to come out, that there'll be some kind of disclosure around the UFO file, around the X technology. So therefore, they want their role to be well recorded for history. That's why we have the LBJ time capsule. That's why we have the Eisenhower time capsule. That's why we have the Nixon time capsule. That's why we have the von Neumann time capsule. So, they work on it. They understand the secrecy, but they want their role divulged. Now, are you saying that are they underestimating X Protect and what X Protect will do to get that? It's possible, but I think the X Share group and the people who move into that understanding that we need to share this information with the broader public, I think they're coming from the place that they believe that things might be hot and political at the time that they're doing it, but they assume after 50 years this is going to come out. This is the amazing thing about the secrecy. This is the amazing thing about the Apollo program. This is the amazing thing about the fact that we're talking about going back to the moon, but we haven't been there since the early 70s. Why not? It's absurd. And, this has been pointed out before, but the idea that it was because money, there wasn't a budget for it is ridiculous. Because in many cases, the capsules, that stuff had already been developed. So it wasn't money. So what was it? Why did those things go black? Why are we saying, hey, by 2028, we'll be back on the moon? How did you lose 50 years of space development? And now, when we look at space, what do we have? We have the space fence bearing down, and we have privatization of space. But what happened to all the money we put into these space programs? I mean, all we get are, some Mars rovers, and it's very, very unusual. And so the idea of a secret space program, this is where the heart of that question resides. And it is a totally legitimate question, regardless of the frauds who have come out about it, regardless of the joke that the marketeers and the intel groups have tried to make of it. Secret space program actually is fundamentally provable. Yes.
I'm good. One more time. Soft alloy 07. Is all of this somehow connected to the breakaway civilization?
Yeah. I don't think the breakaway civilization is the right. I've been noticing, I think Joseph can correct me, but he's been using breakaway group a lot more. And the group sounds more like it now to me. It seems like that the breakaway faction resides and has the technology, but when you get to that breakaway level, you have two sides inside of that breakaway window. You've got the X Share people who want to move it out to the culture, and you have the ex-protect people, and that's a battle that goes on back and forth. And it looks like an inside war takes place there, because when you have people, like as I pointed out earlier, like Clara showing up with a strange suicide where she supposedly just, jumped off a pier in San Diego. As I've pointed out, these scientists don't get to walk the beach on their own without surveillance, because no one wants, they're very valuable and nobody wants them to be gobbled up by Cold War agents for the other side. So that these stories don't hold up. And the reason I go back to people like Jessup, all the way back to his strange suicide in 1959, you have so many other people you could look at, Larry McDonald. Mac Tonnies is another one. These people, I think that they engage some aspect of the story that has to stay hidden, and that these groups, the ex-protect groups, that's where you see them active in public, and if you go through those histories, Frank Edwards, very unusual death after writing about the Men in Black, for example. John Keel stuck around. I don't know how John Keel survived, because he went deep. But I would say that on the breakaway level, there's still a faction in there that wants to share it, and there's a faction that wants to just have a secrecy wall forever and basically treat humanity as pawns while they develop the technology. And it seems to me that inside those groups, they can use platitudes like, people don't know what's good for them and we can control the reality, and there would be massive chaos and religion would suffer and all the rest. So I think that they can get the more reasonable people to go along with them using lines like that. Okay, yes.
Okay, this is great. The Martian archaeologist. Is this a breakaway group of the breakaway group? Is it possible that the old breakaway civilization going since old times is fighting the breakaway group?
Yeah, wow, that's great. That's really well done. I would say this. I do believe that age now has something to do with it, and that we could have a younger group coming into possession of a lot of this. But I think that even back in the Kennedy, the reason the Kennedy presidency is like, it's like World War II. It's a crucial moment where everything changes for the future, when he is eliminated after he tries to open things up. But Kennedy is basically like, that's glasnost, right? This is opening the culture up. Transparency, let's get transparency around the Fed. Let's get transparency around the alien issue. It's confirmable that he was trying to work with the Russians on transferring UFO data. That much we know for sure. We have stories, like I said, with Caddy saying that Hunt said that Kennedy was assassinated over the UFO file because he wanted to give it to the Russians. There's so much fundamental underlying information and evidence that would support that I think that it's a great snapshot of how to look at X-Share versus X-Protect. And X-Protect, would definitely be the Allen Dulles mentality, basically, which is, we're going to keep control no matter what, and the secrecy is going to be here, and we're going to sell you ridiculous stories about a communist with an old gun assassinating the president. That is just the kind of things that people like counterintelligence agencies do. So, and I always point out that the whole story that came out with TTSA, who did they have coming out and doing the stories? It's a CIA counterintelligence guy, Elizondo, who's good at doing what? Making up stories and lying. So, it's very strange. I have to tell you, the UFO aspect is in a very strange corridor right now, because it's being manipulated more than ever. And once you get the New York Times and Harry Reid involved, I mean, Harry Reid, that's a very inside player, a very deep player. And if you're playing in Nevada, that is a serious dark corridor. And so to have him out front as any kind of like TTSA supporter, and that this is how you're going to get UFO disclosure, through people like that, I don't think so. but that's a fascinating thing. One thing I forgot, which I'm going to jump in here, Olivia, if you presume upon you, more support for the idea that von Neumann was handling the UFO file. We've got Sar Barker's statement about it. But this is Whitley Strieber. I found this very interesting, and it was just a journal entry that he made in relation to Barry Goldwater and his quest for finding out things about UFOs. I should remind everyone that you're watching the Dark Journalist show. It's a fantastic crowd here tonight. I want to tell everyone a programming note is that tomorrow night we have a show at 6 p.m., which is episode 50. It's the 1-year anniversary of the X series. And we're going to be joined by Gigi Young, and we're discussing Rudolf Steiner's planetary seals and the great revelation there that he left behind in anthroposophy for planets. And there's something very explosive inside there. If you want to know anything about the planet Venus, Steiner's got it. And we're going to get deep, deep into that tomorrow as well. I'm very excited for that. So Whitley Strieber now talking about von Neumann. And Whitley Strieber has a family friend named General Exxon, who was around during things like the Roswell crash, etc. So straight from Whitley now, and this is right on his website. In 1988, I had a couple of conversations with General Arthur Exxon, who was an old friend of one of my uncles and was then the retired commandant of Wright-Patterson. He told me that far from getting out of the UFO business with the publication of the Condon Report, there was still a scientific effort going on to understand the debris that had been found at Roswell and other materials that had been obtained since then. He said of the secrecy that there had been speculation put forth in a short memo by a famous scientist in 1952 to the effect that if they were from a parallel universe rather than another planet, they might not be able to fully invest themselves in our reality until and if our assumption that they are real becomes as fundamental as our assumption that another person or table or anything around us is real. It didn't take me long to determine that this scientist was John von Neumann, who wrote brilliantly on the quantum perception problem and also created the idea of the von Neumann machine, which would be a machine set to travel the galaxy and replicate the species that created it every time it found a planet suitable for their habitation. It would contain a complete image of the species and be able to artificially grow living representatives of it. This is very, very interesting. It's just a little side note in Whitley's description of his conversation with Exxon. And somehow he concludes that it's von Neumann who gave the general this information. And again, the information that the general got was that if they were from a parallel universe rather than another planet, that basically we would have to believe in them for them to exist. And that this was the level that it was on, that if they throw the switch at that top level and say, yes, they do exist, then everyone will make them a reality by believing it. And that as long as we don't actually know that they exist, that because they're in a parallel situation, there's something about our observation of the fact, there's this whole idea there about, do we change physics by looking at them? It's the thing we talked about earlier with the Fermi paradox. So I do feel that's very, very interesting. And it's just a little kind of a strange bonus. Okay, Miss Olivia.
David Tormina, DJ, do you believe that the human soul can exist inside of a self-replicating artificial DNA body? Is this what von Neumann was working on?
It was what von Neumann was working on. I think if he came out, with the quote that I used earlier, he felt that you could make a machine self-replicate, and then he became deeply involved with the Macy conferences on cybernetics. And he gave us the modern computing structure. So, like I said, a lot of what we're living inside of is von Neumann's reality. He had struggles with the idea of God and spirituality. There's no question about it. And he was quoted once as saying it would make more sense. It would actually explain a lot of scientific things if there were a God, because otherwise you have too many questions. But it seemed like he had this struggle, and he had this incredible fear of death once he became ill, which shocked many of those around him that, of course, they understood the serious situation he was in, but his absolute terror at the idea means that, spiritually he was certainly out of whack. But what's fascinating, and what I didn't mention, is that on his deathbed, he recited a chapter of Goethe's Faust for his brother. And we see Goethe's Faust comes into play over and over again. This is what trips off Tesla to, there's a word in there where he says round and round again. And that's how he figures out alternating current. And so there's something embedded inside of Goethe's work, and Goethe being, an excellent candidate for the mystery schools. He's somebody certainly who was associated with them. And he becomes the model for Rudolf Steiner when Steiner does his work. What happens when Steiner comes out of the University of Vienna? He writes a book on Goethe and nature, and then he goes on about Goethe. That's how he gets into spirituality, really. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to go into a weird little detour here. So Mary Cox wanted to address the Martian issue.
Yes.
Could they have been a group soul from Atlantis incarnating to move humanity and technologies? And Scruples 4444 says, does DJ ever wonder why those smart men of power all have German-sounding names? Neumann, Sar Barker, Steiner, etc. What do you think?
Well, listen, Neumann, I don't have the university name. Actually, if I just pull out his bio, I can tell you. But he came out of the German university situation. He was a professor at 27, which is remarkable. And they recruited him for Princeton out of that situation. So there's no doubt that Neumann's career moves right through Germany. And I think it's interesting. The group soul idea is something that you'll find in the Casey research, which is that this whole idea about why Atlantis becomes this such an important thing in our time, again, is because all of those people who experienced that destruction the first time around have reincarnated, and they're facing the entire struggle all over again this time to do it without completely suffering a deluge and blowing themselves up, essentially. So will they move towards destruction this time, or did they learn their lesson? That's at least a 10,000, 12,000 year old lesson. It's an interesting question if we have, but certainly when Casey goes on that level, or if you look at Steiner's cosmology, he cites the same type of thing, those souls coming back with that memory, soul cellular memory. Someone made the question earlier, do you think a soul could incarnate inside of a cyborg? And, I often go back to this quote by Elon Musk when he's talking about putting his consciousness inside of an avatar box. If you understand, there's two things I think to understand there. One is, if you understand anything like mystery school knowledge, then you know that your soul resides inside your endocrine system. So the idea of projecting your soul consciousness into a box doesn't fly if you understand anything about fundamental mystery school spiritual teachings. So there's something very strange about that. Tomorrow we will touch on the eighth sphere aspect, which is that idea. It's kind of a trap. It's a virtual reality trap. And but certainly no, I don't believe that you could project your soul into a cyborg. Not at all. As a matter of fact, I think that's the big sort of fake out of all this. When they what did they have? What was the name of that robot thing that we saw where she was doing a fashion shoot?
Oh, Sophia.
Horrible. Sophia, yeah.
My nemesis.
My God. You had a great reaction to that.
I do.
The things that they're trying to do,
How do I look in red?
This is some real illness going on in the culture, and I think they're going to look back at that and be like, what was going on? But that's what the Davos crowd is selling, right? Because they want Amazon robots. So like, while they're taking all your jobs and shipping you out, they're going to be like, hey, look, we have like chatty, funny robots who have their own reality show. So yeah, we know where they're heading with that. Yes.
Okay, since you just mentioned Elon Musk,
Yes.
Big Papa Pump says, do you think the deep state wants to pull Elon Musk's security clearance because he's part of X Reveal?
X reveal. I like that.
Or X Share.
X share, I think is the term. But I like X reveal too. Listen, here's the thing. I will say this, that it seems like Richard Branson was really hardcore on the space tourism aspect. And I read his prospectus and everything. This guy was ready to roll. Somehow he got nudged out. And then Elon Musk with X everything, SpaceX, he owns X.com. Can you get any more X steganography than that? He became their main man. But then apparently he was messing up in public or something because, they gave him a shakeup too. So I don't think that I think the level of trust that they need for the person who is going to really dominate the privatization of space aspect, I don't think that they have it with Elon Musk, and I don't think that they have it with even guys like Bigelow. They need something, I don't think they've decided on who's going to be the lord of space, as it were. One quick thing I want to mention, speaking of Branson, and as you know, we're going deep in the hot zone. As a matter of fact, I'm going to announce right now that April is going to be hot zone month because we have some incredible things to bring forward. But this story I found very interesting. Richard Branson and a group of scientists make exciting discovery inside Great Blue Hole, which is right in the hot zone. Actually, it's off Belize. Groundbreaking mission to the bottom of the Great Blue Hole in Central America has uncovered a mysterious find along the ocean seabed. This is how unusual this story is. A team of scientists, including Virgin billionaire Richard Branson, who's not talking about space all of a sudden, has returned from a mission to the bottom of Central America's nations, the Great Blue Hole, one of the largest sinkholes. The groundbreaking voyage kicked off December 2018 and saw the group descend to the bottom of a 125-meter hole to find out exactly what lives inside. Using 2 submarines, the group hoped to discover what sat at the bottom of the mysterious hole, which was discovered in 1971 by underwater explorer Jacques Cousteau. In an interview with CNN Travel, chief pilot of the expedition, Erica Bergman, said, underwater discovery was really cool. Hey, there's some intelligent commentary. Mm-hmm. We did a 360 sonar map. The map is almost complete, she said. It looks really cool. It's this mesh-layered sonar scan of the entire 1,000-foot diameter hole. According to Bergman, one of the most exciting discovery inside the sinkholes were never before seen stalactites and mineral formations shaped like icicles. Now, there's something else that's weird in this. Oh, here it is. Despite uncovering various features in the murky waters, some discoveries were unable to be identified, including a set of strange tracks at the bottom of the hole that seemed to show little human impact. There's got tracks down there, but they know that there's no humans, so where are the tracks coming from? It's neat, and there are spaces on our planet, most of them in the oceans, that are exactly the way they were thousands of years ago and will remain exactly the way they are thousands of years in the future. So they dance this little weird thing out there about these tracks. They don't show any pictures of them. And then they go on to just be like, hey, isn't it cool to have a big sinkhole in the hot zone? So there's something very weird. The Great Blue Hole is a large underwater sinkhole off the coast of Belize, right in that, Yucatan, the tip is where I've traced the edge of the hot zone, and it's right below it. It lies the center of the Lighthouse Reef, a small atoll 62 miles from the mainland of Belize City, is part of the large Barrier Reef Reserve System. So it's thought to have been a huge cave on dry land about 100,000 years ago. As the ocean rose, the cave flooded. And this is a shot, actually. It's the second largest of its kind, but just to give us some idea of what's going on there. Branson's involvement with this really I find interesting. And if Branson's in the hot zone, maybe this is the cover for the investigation of what they're doing, looking into the whole Atlantis Rising aspect that we've been covering in the hot zone episodes. Okay, yes.
Okay. Ishi Bogi. Since a perfect body was needed for the spiritual Christ to enter for only 3 years, I'm thinking a robot is needed for the Antichrist to inhabit with immortality as the intention.
Well, that's very interesting. There's a lot of mystery school lore about this, which is that Jesus perfected the body for 30 years, and then for 3 years, Christ inhabited it, did his ministry, and then ascended when the crucifixion happened. Now, the idea that the Antichrist is going to be embodied by technology actually falls more in with the Steiner material, because Steiner's version is that Ahriman has to have an actual incarnation, and he puts that here in this period, but it's, it stretches out so much. It could be any time during this 100 years. This idea that an actual physical incarnation would take place has always been fascinating. But Steiner, being such a futurist as he was, I mean, he died in 1925, but he saw so many things, including, the internet, including this kind of highly transhumanist culture. And what he warned of was that, it was fine that this was going to happen with Ahriman coming forward, and Ahriman being this dark astral force that, it's the version and anthroposophy of Satan, basically. As we've done a number of shows on it, it's a complex subject, but I'll say that just to simplify it. In any case, if you really study it, you do get the impression that he's speaking about an incarnation, because everything about Ahriman is heavy, and it's, it's this kind of mineral-based heaviness. And when you look at that and you think about projecting consciousness and all the rest of it, the idea that it would be a cyborg that Ahriman would be in. So the idea is, when Ahriman gets incarnated, is Ahriman the Antichrist? These are some interesting questions, I think, that you raise there. Yes.
Okay, Silver Fox. I wonder if 5G is alien tech originally. I wonder if 5G will affect other dimensions. And then a cult fan said, if perception affects quantum particles, Schrodinger's box, Gigi is saying about lower astral, could our perception be enhanced by 5G to bring these beings to our realm to, quote, invade?
Well, it's really interesting. Well, you know what you've done? You've set up the perfect question to ask Gigi tomorrow night.
Okay.
I can't answer that one. I think that's a Gigi question. I would love to hear what she has to say about it. I will say this in relation to 5G, which is some very good scientists have gone on the record saying that it's such a health hazard that they're just flabbergasted at how it's being rolled out and how they're launching these 20,000 satellites. I think it's definitely going to happen. There's no question about that. They're going to move into this, but the knowledge around it, I think, the knowledge campaign to spread the knowledge about 5G and its dangers is going to go into overdrive this year. And I'll tell you, it shows, again, the Davos crowd having a great tin ear to the public, just like they have on so many other issues, forcing this down their throat for profit. The idea that it has anything to do with aliens, etc., I find this very interesting, and it's so weird that aliens get brought up in relation to 5G. I'm trying to really, I know Cliff High mentioned it in an interview. Where is this coming from? Why are we getting 5G in relation to aliens? Where's the source of that question? I don't see that they're related. It seems to me that it's a very invasive technology, but I don't see anything related to aliens about it. Okay.
Okay, so if we're going to talk about aliens, give me a second, let me find it. Giovanni Delgado says, can DJ make more of an argument for it being aliens and not just secret space program?
Well, look, if you have a secret space program, then you've seen you've seen off-world craft out there. And you know that, just like they briefed President Reagan in 1986, hey, there are these large ships refueling in Saturn's rings. So a secret space program implies that those people understand the name of the game out there. That's why it's secret. But remember, earlier I talked about COG. if you just invert the underground world, which we can't get access to because it's under COG rules, continuity of government rules, and that's pretty high classification. I mean, it's so secret that, you know, because you're dealing with nuclear attack and things like that, you'll never get access to it. But if they inverted those rules and brought them out into space using the same setup and parameters, that's why you can have a secret space program and keep it secret, because you're using the same COG rules. The fundamental gap in constitutional government in America is that we don't have control over the continuity of government rules. And it is the system which Professor Peter Dale Scott at UC Berkeley, and in a number of interviews with me here, has spelled out. It's an independent, it's a covert government, and it has to be understood and brought to light so that the culture can maintain and control it, basically. You know, you get secret. COG is a fundamental tenet, pillar of how you get such a wall of secrecy in our country and around the world. So that has to be understood, I think, for sure. Okay, we'll take two more questions.
Okay, so Aether,
Yes.
is there a connection between XShare and XProtect within the media? Do both groups work with specific directors or media companies to push their agendas in the public sphere?
Well, the media here is so controlled by the Council on Foreign Relations. So, you know, it's interesting. It seems like those guys, all they have to do is check in with the groups that control the UFO file and say, what are the rules around how we report this? They get those rules back, and that's it. And we see how when a news story comes out, you have 250 outlets that say exactly the same thing, including the same words, that the mainstream media is completely dominated that way. Now, I've come to expect that from the media, but I think they've been incredibly, I think they've been worse since the 2016 election with Trump, because they had an agenda and they got thwarted, and they've been using every power and every lever of power that they can get their hands on to shut down the alternative media, because they realize they have a real threat there, and they also want their market share. So, you know, this has to be understood. When you get to the media part, it's not that they have direct, you know, you couldn't take like the Washington Post, the editor of the Washington Post, and say, hey, he knows about UFOs and he's just not telling. No, he interacts with a level of power through the Council of Foreign Relations, and they say, these are the talking points that we have around the UFO subject. That's as far as you can go. Inside of that, whatever you do inside of that, we don't care. But you can't go beyond this threshold with it. That's the way that I think that works. And in the media environments that I've been around, it seems that when there's a choke point for a story that is something they don't want to get beyond a certain level, it's easy. I'll tell you how you shut it down. You have the editor go to the person who's working on the story and say, you can't work on that story anymore. And that's the way it works. And then that's the end of the story. Even if you have a good reporter, they have to listen to the editor. The editor calls the shots. The editor gets his cues from the publisher. If the publisher is Jeff Bezos for the Washington Post, and he's building a cloud for the CIA, you can see where the news is going to come from. So I think that's a situation that explains itself. The media is in a mess. We're going to need a complete reform. You know, you talk about reconstruction. We're going to need reconstruction of the media. And we're also, on the independent side, we're going to have to get responsible. We had a lot of irresponsible stuff. Look what happened with the story with Linda Moulton Howe. And, you know, what did she say? She said that Wilcock ripped off her reporting. When you look into it, what happens? He ripped off her reporting. You know, that kind of irresponsible stuff that floats around in the independent media, we're never going to get a handle on the big push down from the mainstream media if we don't have a foundation of integrity in the independent media. This is a big, major problem. And I see it as something that needs addressing in the grand scheme of things, because you can't get a genuine alternative to this manipulated mainstream media if you don't have integrity in the independent media. That's the same thing. then, what's the difference? So you're going to have to develop protocols that would allow you to understand, this is a reputable news organization. It's independent. And there's many of them that are great. Forbidden Knowledge TV with Alexander Bruce. I mean, I can name many. Dr. Joseph Farrell is here tonight. So we have the people, we have the ability. We just need that kind of real push for genuine media. Yes.
Najat Madri. Does COG have the legal authority to overwrite the U.S. Constitution?
Yeah, this is what Professor Scott has pointed out, which is that they did during 9/11, and that we've existed under emergency COG rules ever since. So that involves a number of factors. And, I have a show called SSP and COG, which was a presentation that I gave at Ireland Awakens, I think it was called. And it covers that. I think it's a good thing. But I think the short answer is yes. And I recommend Professor Scott's American Deep State book, Deep Politics and the Death of JFK book, and Road to 9/11 book. I think that those three will keep you busy for a long time, but you'll learn a heck of a lot, as I did. And Professor Scott's work really, but you have to understand, he doesn't talk about the UFO file and stuff like that.
I was just going to say it.
Yeah.
Everybody who has spent the last 3 years paying attention to crap like Wilcock and Corey Good and stuff, if they had spent the time with Professor Scott, this is what the community needs to do. It's less fantasy, more dealing with the hard truths on the ground, trustworthy sources. We can change things.
Yeah, it is true. Well, here's the thing. The information is there and available, right? And you have to spend the time with it. With Professor Scott's work, in conversation with him, he's made such an impression on me that I can genuinely say that one of the pillars of dark journalism for me is Professor Scott. So, and like I said, he doesn't deal, he's not going to talk about mystery schools, and he's not going to deal with the UFO file, but he's dealing with the political, diplomatic, geopolitical realities that we face as a society. And those things, for that information, remember he coined the term the deep state. Deep Politics is the book he wrote in 1992. So there is a fundamental piece there that Professor Scott has given us a foundation. And, I think that there's a lot of fast food in the independent media, and that it should be more, the level-headed analysis. We have the people, and thank God we have the talent and the research. So that's more where I do it. And that's what I say, get behind those sources, get behind Solari, get behind Forbidden Knowledge TV, get behind Dark Journalists, get behind Giza Death Star. I think this is where fundamentally you're going to get the information, which will really expand the picture for you. So those are the sources that I recommend on a regular basis because I use that information myself. Okay, we'll take one more question.
Okay. Well, let's do this. Clever Indigo Dolphinisms. Question, CERN.
Dolphinism.
Yeah, dolphinisms.
Dolphinisms.
Question, CERN, reality distortion effect, Apotheum.
Wow, so interesting. I had some information on CERN and their weird X particle. But I'm going to talk about CERN more tomorrow night with Gigi. So I'm going to save it for that. But I will say that one of the things that I think is interesting about CERN is that it can exist in this completely unaccountable framework. They're building now a CERN that is 5 times as big as the original and has a $20 billion budget. Now, when Dr. Farrell presented his book in 2015, which was the third wave, he said something remarkable, which was that CERN had a $6 billion budget. That looked more like a military budget than a scientific budget. And that I completely understood CERN in a different way. Now it's 5 times as big and it has a $20 billion budget. that's really a military budget. I think the accountability around CERN, becomes very important. Yes, there are a lot of rumors and all the rest of it, but let's start with, the real accountability for this strange independent entity, which is doing all kinds of experiments based on the environment, and that they say that they have magnetic control in there that is something like 20 times the magnetic impact of the sun. I think an environmental project like that, under any circumstances, deserves a heck of a lot more scrutiny than it's getting. And so, therefore, I think on the independent side, we've got the right one there. Yes.
Who's paying for that?
Well, wouldn't that be nice? It would be nice to know. Yeah, I agree with you.
There's no way to.
Well, this is the interesting thing that there were actually a group of scientists from Hawaii, which was really fantastic, and they were concerned about these strangelets, which are these mini black holes. This minor possibility that CERN could generate something like that, but just the idea that they could take them on environmentally, because CERN is just this, and I'm talking specifically about the Hadron Collider and the Large Hadron Collider and its experiments to find the Higgs boson. Now it's just like, hey, we're past that. We're doing other stuff. We just want to keep cranking it up for no reason. But what they found out was that when they got into court was that CERN was a sovereign entity. So it was very difficult. It wasn't like trying to sue a corporation or something. It was an entity. It was almost like you were trying to sue Jamaica. Really. So, there's all sorts of unusual connections in relation to that. And I think that it's the fact that they've shut it down temporarily and they're building this big one is the perfect time to really go in to see, like, hey, what are the environmental effects of this? Who's backing it? But the level of scrutiny, I think, needs to get cranked way up on a CERN around the Large Hadron Collider and around the Alice Collider. And I think that, certainly we've done some coverage. I did an episode with Dr. Farrell called CERN Apotheosis. And I went back and listened to that recently, and it still stands very well, but I'd love to hear more from Dr. Farrell on it. I hope we can get Dr. Farrell soon, now that the book is almost done. So we'll have him back on later this month. That's it. Thank you so much, everyone. Fantastic questions tonight. And before we leave von Neumann, I want to show this very interesting picture. There's a couple of pictures I wanted to show.
Oh, I got to ask this question.
Oh, yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. Go
okay.
ahead.
So, Stephen Christ, are the conflicting factions of Atlantean civilization represented today by ex-protect and ex-share rivalry?
There is a rivalry, and I think the technological factions, there is a war that's been taking place between those factions. It seems to me, I would clock that war since the 1940s. It may go much further back if you get into real, true mystery school history. But at least I think that that's trackable. And the idea of ex-share and people like Thomas Townsend Brown, the Kennedy administration, and this ilk, and it appears to me, von Neumann, before the end of his life, that these people who are moving into ex-share faced great dangers. And it seems like ex-protect's MO is protect the secrecy at all cost. So I think that's a good way to understand those two groups. And yes, they're still at war in a big way. You've got on one hand the Space Force announcement, and I understand that these are kind of fluffy caricatures of the real thing, but still take it under consideration. Think of ATIP versus the Space Force. This is an unusual power grab on both sides. ATIP comes completely out of a Democratic Hillary-connected operation. All of that TTSA stuff did. And the Space Force is Trump's attempt to get some kind of a handle on that. But then thrown in with the Space Force is to make it a war-fighting domain, which, by the way, we have completely, signed on to different treaties that we can't do that. So what are you talking about? There's a lot of problems there. And I think on space, the transparency is at an all-time low. You think Antarctic is bad? Try space.
Matt Murtaugh had a follow-up question. Who's winning?
um,
We're losing.
no. We're winning. When we talk about it, we're winning. So when we talk about XProtect versus XShare, we're winning because we're understanding. See, one of the things is, one of the things about this that I think is complex is something that Catherine Austin Fitts goes back to, which is people feel under siege, but they can't identify where it's coming from. So they lash out in different ways in different areas to try to see this invisible force that's kind of narrowing down. And I portray that really as intel forces on one side and marketing forces on the other. And it's getting harder and harder for us to drive down the middle with real information. But I think that there's certainly incredible information available right now. And that if we avail ourselves of it, we win for sure.
I'm going to let Gigi have the last word on this. She says, XShare has an advantage. Truth is advantage.
That's great. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, this is the Jim Garrison line. One man armed with the truth constitutes a majority, and he proved it. Because 50 years later, no one believes, except for people who have no awareness, that the Kennedy assassination took place because Lee Harvey Oswald was a disgruntled minimum wage worker who just happened to get a job during the last few weeks before President Kennedy just happened to go by his window. Gee, that's a lot of luck, huh? Amazing. We should call him Lucky Oswald. That's what we should do. Forget about Lucky Luciano. Lucky Oswald. But Oswald was unlucky, as we know, because the CIA took him out, and because you can't, you're not going to be able to maintain that cover with him still alive. So that story, I'll tell you, I've done documentaries on it and shows on it. The information, the wall of secrecy around that is a great demonstration of XProtect. They will do anything. They will make themselves look foolish. They'll peddle the most asinine story on the planet to get you to look the other way and just get exhausted with it. But that story is absurd. And, we've made this very interesting observation. I think it was Dr. Farrell who made the observation, which is if you, during a high school test, if they give you a multiple choice question about who assassinated President Kennedy, if you identify anyone but Lee Harvey Oswald, technically you're wrong. But, the majority of Americans know that's bunk. So there's a schizophrenic situation there between public information as it's available and what we know on the ground. So there's the official version, and then there's this counter story that we understand. So there we go. Thank you so much, everyone. What a fantastic show. A great crowd. And it's great to have everyone out there. Tomorrow night, we're going to have Rudolf Steiner, the planetary seals. And I asked Gigi if we could get into the Serpent Mounds as well. If we're going there, things are going to get explosive. I can't wait for that show. It's going to be at 6 p.m. Eastern time. A lot of our European friends will be able to join us. And it's the 1-year anniversary, and it's the 50th episode. And I'm really excited to do that. I hope I did some justice to John von Neumann and his story tonight. One thing I will say is that Forbes recently carried an article, and it was called How a Woman You Never Heard Of Helped Enable Modern Weather Prediction. Well, it turns out it was, in fact, von Neumann's wife. As I was discussing Clara earlier, many people, particularly in meteorological or math circles, are familiar with John von Neumann. However, it's not as widely known that Clara, Dan von Neumann, played a role in the pioneering process of weather prediction that we now take for granted. You see, she was a very advanced player, and that's another reason why her suicide is very, very unusual. She was a Hungarian-born computer programmer that wrote the code for the machine called Maniac, used by her husband and colleagues at Los Alamos National Laboratory to support nuclear fusion research. Yeah, you think there's something suspicious about her suicide? I do. And there she is, working out the code way back there when there was some hope that these computers were going to bring us something better than the transhumanist reality. And, in many ways, the computers have enhanced our lives, but the dangers are riding right there with it. And fantastic crowd tonight, fantastic people out there. I know we've got Jay Mallet and we've got David Termina. Great questions. Thank you very much. Deep State Kate, I know she's out there. Modwiz, it's great to see you. Wow. A cult fan, always excellent. Okay,
Brilliant questions.
Okay, Computer, right? That's Radiohead. It's a very funny album too. Niche is out there. It's great to see you out there. You do terrific stuff. And
can I do a shout out?
Yes.
So I wanted to say congratulations to the Cosmic Garden, who welcomed their new baby named Aspen Willow Lindsay this week.
That's great. That's fantastic. Wow. And Roosevelt Media News, fantastic. Thank you. You do great work. Mark Anthony, who else we got out there? K Tower, excellent. Najat, thank you so much. Everyone, your questions were off the charts great. We will see you tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. And as we sign out to now, I have to sign out on a sad note, which is that we lost a dear voice in the alternative media last week, which was Dr. Robin Falkov, who was the wife of Richard Hoagland, but did incredible work on her own as a doctor. And she was on the show in 2016, and she was always incredibly supportive behind the scenes. We always had great conversations. And,
she was beautiful and sassy and sexy and brilliant. And
what an incredible voice she was. And all of us were very impressed by her example. And we'll miss her. We, it's a tough thing when we've lost people like Jim Mars and Robin, and it makes you realize how important and valuable the work that they do and that they gave to us are. And I always, like I say, with the mystery schools and the legacy that they left behind, when I'm faced with the legacy that these incredible people have given us, I'm always asking, are we using the great example that they gave us? And that's the question I'm going to ask myself as I do the show. Thank you so much. Jesse from New Guard Network, he's out there. Mm-hmm. And Jesse, of course, he's always got the inside scoop. We will see you tomorrow.
Actually, can we end on a different note?
Yes.
Because that was a very sad note to end on.
Well, yes.
So I'm just going to throw this in. JJK, why is Kissinger so protected? It's kind of an ultimate question.
Well,
why him?
He's such a deep player in the
but
deep
why?
state. Well, what's fascinating about that, which is that Mae Brussel had an interesting theory about this, which was that he was the protege of this very unusual German who had this incredible power through all these think tanks in America and had a chair at Harvard and all the rest. And she felt that his big entree into this world was through this very unusual German figure who had ties to Nazi Germany, Fritz Kramer. And that's one answer. I do feel that there's so many, different ways you can look at Kissinger, sitting there in the heart of the Bilderberg and in the heart of this foreign policy mechanism. He represents that the old guard in relation to the deep state. And, those guys, just like Poppy Bush and so many of these figures, David Rockefeller, they're so entrenched in that underworld that their power is gained through those connections that they have been kind of perpetuating their entire lives. But yeah, wow, an incredible character. And I'll tell you what's very strange, brings us all the way around to Robert Merritt's story about the Nixon time capsule, because who was it that he said he was supposed to deliver the copy of the time capsule to? The message? And that he had it strapped to his body? It was Kissinger. Very strangely enough, in Robert Merritt's story, Kissinger has the entire contents of the Nixon time capsule, a copy of it. Very interesting indeed. I'll leave you with that this evening. Miss Olivia, incredible. Round of applause for Miss Olivia. incredible control of the questions and getting that narrative just right. We will see you tomorrow night at 6 p.m. here Eastern Time with the amazing Gigi Young. And we're going to go deep, deep into Steiner's work on the planetary seals. And this is going to be a very revelatory, esoteric end of the spectrum, episode 50. Yes.
But I think after this being the 50th episode, we are going to be discussing, kind of theorizing what the X means. We're sharing different opinions on it. Sort of the ultimate X question. Also.
No question. No question. It's as much a mystery. We've got the steganography, and what the steganography is pointing to, we understand that they're using it. But the X itself is, when you get to that level, it's like, what is that, seventh chakras? That's your third eye. But fantastic work. And I guess the only question left, Miss Olivia, is what's for dinner?
Oh, it's definitely going to be pizza. Pizza and root beer.
Root beer. Listen, if it's all natural Maine root beer,
yep.
I'm there. That's the greatest root beer on the planet. We will see you all tomorrow. Dr. Farrell, it's great to have you out there. And Gigi, we'll see you tomorrow night at 6 o'clock sharp. And thank you, everyone. What a great show. And it's fantastic. Remember to go to darkjournalist.com, sign up for the newsletter, get in there, get behind the show. We've made it very affordable for you to subscribe. And this is definitely the time to do it. There's a lot of very special events that we have coming up. And you're going to want to be on the inside of all that. And we appreciate all your support. And after having come up now to the 50th episode of the show, I can tell you that the incredible input that you all have given us in relation to this is very appreciated. And we're going forward strongly with it. And we will see you tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Thank you so much. And Olivia, you get the last word.
Well, good night, everybody. And see you tomorrow.
I like that. Shouldn't you say it in another language?
Buenas noches.
Sounds good to me. Thank you. Pizzetta.